Welcome to God Tier Fanfiction. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Naruto became the ultimate gamer swordsman? If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
The stuff on the table seemed pricey. That was the first thinking of Naruto. Not nice. Not thrilling. Not even a bit intriguing, just too pricey. It sat in the middle of the kitchen table, as if on show, the black package too slick and immaculate for the rest of the room. The Uzumaki house was never dirty per such, but it was lived in. Near the threshold, a pair of Naruto's trainers had been kicked crooked. Over the oven handle lay one of Kushina's folded dish rags, slightly damp from use. Beside the salt shaker was a pile of mail, an envelope already shredded and abandoned. The room was laden with the warm scent of meals and the slight sting of soap from the sink. None of that was applicable. It looked like something that should be behind glass. Naruto was standing by the doorway, one hand still on the strap of his school bag, looking at it with a dull, suspicious sort of perplexity. His blonde hair was a mess from the walk home, wind tossed at the ends, and the collar of his jacket sat crooked since he had only half bothered correcting it when he walked in the door. He looked like someone who expected trouble, found something else, and wasn't quite sure yet if something else was worse. Kushina saw him silent, then saw what it was he was looking at. She turned away from the counter, a wooden spoon in hand, long red hair pushed back in a jumble that had already let a few stray strands escape around her face. She had one hip against the cabinet like she'd been standing there too long, and there was a little smear of sauce near her wrist. "What?" she said. Naruto jerked his chin toward the table. "That." Kushina looked where he looked. Her eyes were on the package. She looked for a second, then she lifted her brows. "Minato." Minato looked up from the other end of the table as if he had been waiting for someone to ask him. He stood next to the box. Too close. Not touching it, but close enough that Naruto could see right away that he'd probably been standing there for long. His sleeves were pulled cleanly to his forearms, his blonde hair was still too neat after a whole day, and there was a brightness in his eyes that made Naruto suspect before he even said anything. Minato was calm normally, in a way that made others trust him. Soft voice. Simple smile. No unnecessary movement. But now there was almost a boyishness beneath. He was trying hard not to look enthusiastic. That made him seem more excited. "Yes," said Minato. Kushina squinted. "What is that?" Minato's hand went for the box, then halted just before it touched, as if even he could see how eager the motion seemed. "It's the nerve gear." Naruto blinked. Kushina gazed. Neither of them spoke. Minato waited intently, but there was no reaction. His smile quirked a little, because of sword art online. Naruto gazed up to his mother. Kushina gazed at her son. Then both of them turned to Minato with the same blank face. Minato's shoulders dropped slightly. "The new full dive game," he added, voice still gentle, but with the faint strain of someone recognizing his audience wasn't where he needed them to be. "It's going live today." Naruto slowly took his knapsack off his shoulder. It sank to the floor beside him with a faint thud. "Right?" Still clutching her spoon, Kushina turned her back to the counter. "That's what Nagato was calling about?" Minato's face lit up again at the name and Naruto saw it immediately. Kushina did too. "Yes," Minato said, "he managed to obtain one through a pre-order chain. We were lucky. Very lucky, actually. Most outlets ran out almost immediately and a lot of folks that waited in line overnight still didn't get one." Naruto looked down at the package again. It was still there. "So, it's game," Naruto said. Minato inhaled, not noisily, but with the quiet preparedness of a man ready to discuss something at length. "Technically, it's a game, yes, but that's selling it short. The nerve gear is the first full dive interface with this level of sensory integration that is consumer ready. It doesn't just put images in front of you. It connects to the nervous system directly. It blocks outgoing motor commands, reroutes them into the virtual environment, and then feeds sensory data back into the brain, so the player experiences the game world as if they're physically present." Naruto looked at him. Kushina looked at him. Behind Kushina, the pot bubbled once. Slowly Naruto turned his head to his mother. "Did you catch any of that?" "No," Kushina answered. Minato expanded his lips. Kushina pointed the spoon at him. "Not because I couldn't. Because I choose peace." Naruto snorted, the sound breaking some of the tension that had walked in with him. He moved further into the room and halted beside one of the chairs. He refused to sit down. He just hooked his fingers over the back of it and rested against it, eyeing the box from a safe distance. Minato fidgeted a little bit around the table, couldn't help himself now. He tapped a finger lightly on the printed logo, almost soundlessly. It's not only impressive because of the technology, he said. World design is supposed to be massive. No magic system, no easy-ranged options, mostly skill-based melee progression. It's supposed to reward discipline, practice, timing, decision-making. Answered Kushina. Minato glanced at her. She'd turned her back again, to the stove, but her mouth was up in that smile that suggested she was really listening, and totally going to use it all against him. Naruto saw it as well, his own eyes contracted. Wait, said Naruto, hesitantly. How do you know all that? Minato stopped, just for a moment, but that was enough. Kushina lifted a hand to stop the stirring. Naruto leaned a bit farther over the chair. Minato put on a perfectly reasonable expression, which in their house signified he was hiding something. Nagato and I looked into it before we bought it. Before you got it for me, Naruto said. I do. Me, Naruto said again. Minato nodded. Yes. Naruto stared back down at the box, then to his father again. You know I don't play those kind of games. This is not a normal game. That's not what I said. Kushina turned from the stove again slowly and now the smile was there in full. Not broad yet, just risky. Minato, she replied softly. Minato stared at her. Caring too much. Yes. Why did you get Naruto a really expensive game system for a game he doesn't care about? The question sat right and Naruto's jaw dropped open a little. Then he stared at Minato as well. Minato stayed where he was. That was the issue. Minato was quite good under pressure but at home, with Kushina observing him like that and Naruto catching up slowly, his immobility was suspicious. He appeared too self-possessed. Like a guy in front of a broken vase, gently demonstrating how gravity worked. I thought it would be good for him, stated Minato. Naruto's eyes narrowed ever more. How? Good for me. It would offer you something systematic to focus on. Kushina made a little noise. Minato ignored it and continued. Something solid and safe. Something with rules. Progress. Somewhere to put your energy that wasn't scaling buildings or running from strangers or coming home with injured knuckles and telling people you walked into a door. Naruto's face spasmed just a little, but not enough to start a fight. He looked aside first, massaging the back of his neck. That was only once. Which one? Kushina asked. Naruto looked at her. She grinned back at him. Minato's voice shed some of its polished excitement, softening a little. I mean it, Naruto. Nagato agreed. You have had a rough time settling lately. Naruto glanced not at him but at the package. The room grew quiet at the edges. Not silent, not heavy enough to disrupt the scene, yet the humor faded out. The saucepan was still bubbling. A car went by outside. Old floorboards creaked somewhere in the depths of the home as the temperature shifted in the evening. Kushina's countenance softened as well, though she masked it quicker than Minato. She laid the spoon on the little dish by the stove and wiped her hand on a towel. Naruto's fingers flexed around the back of the chair. I'm okay, he said. Kushina stared at him, not mad, not even questionable. Just motherly enough to be a pain. You're never not fine until you're not fine, she said. Naruto huffed. That sounds like fake deep. Sounds like I've known you since you were little enough to bite people when you were furious. I was 3 years old then. You were 5. Minato almost smiled. Naruto saw it and pointed to it instantly. Don't. Minato's lips softened. Kushina crossed her arms now, towel still dangling from one hand. So you and Nagato thought this would keep him busy. Occupied, Minato corrected. Naruto snorted. That's worse. It isn't any worse. Sounds worse. It's what it sounds like, Kushina murmured, her eyes focused on Minato. Something to distract you. Minato was hesitant. The hesitation spoke volumes than his answer would have. Naruto leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. He shifted his posture, not defensively in the angry sense, but cautious. But he was still staring at the package. That was important. So you bought me a geek hat because I always getting in trouble. Minato sighed softly. You wouldn't call it that. That's what it is. It's a full-dive virtual reality interface. Nerd helmet. Kushina nodded in agreement. Geek hat. Minato gazed between them, misled by how readily they worked together. It's not a nerd helmet. Naruto's lips trembled. Kushina did as well. Then her gaze darted down to the unopened box, and remained there. Then a fresh concept slowly crossed her countenance. Naruto saw that expression quickly. Something clicked, and Kushina had the most distinct look in her head. At first her eyes were quiet, and then a slight curve at one corner of her mouth, and then the full, pleased sharpness of a woman who had found a thread and meant to pull until the sweater died. "Stop," she said. Minato's tone remained, but Naruto did see. His father sensed danger in the room. Kushina moved towards the table. "You told me it was sold out." "Uh-huh, Nagato got you one, too." "Yeah, and you know the game well enough." "I googled it." Naruto didn't like it. Minato didn't answer fast enough. Naruto looked from Kushina to Minato. Kushina rested one hand on the table, leaning over the box as if she were examining evidence. "This you bought for yourself." Minato's face was tranquil. "Too quiet. No thanks." Naruto blinked, then swung all the way to his father. Kushina's smile broadened. "You did?" "Oh, I did not." "You definitely did. I bought it for Naruto." "You bought it near Naruto," Kushina remarked. Naruto made a choked sound that was half chuckle, half incredulity. "Wait." Kushina threw the towel at Minato. "You thought he didn't want it." Minato glared at the towel like it personally blamed him. "I thought there was a chance he might not connect with it." Naruto looked at him. "That's the guiltiest thing you've ever uttered." "Fair assessment, I think. You purchased me a gift, expecting me to despise it." No number. Kushina's grin was pitiless now. "You bought him a present hoping he would get bored and say it was lame, and then you could be generous by taking it off his hands." Minato's quiet was half a second too long. Naruto's face brightened. Not with joy of the moment. By treachery, the enjoyable sort. "Oh, my god." Minato closed his eyes for a second. "Naruto." "No, no, no." Naruto circled around the chair, suddenly more interested in the box than he had been all evening. "You did. You sure did." Minato chose his words carefully. "I assumed that if you enjoyed it, then it would be valuable to you. What if I didn't? Then there'd be no point in letting it go to waste." Kushina smacked the towel against the table once, laughing. "There you go." Naruto raked both hands through his hair, forcing it up in wild blonde spikes, then letting it fall back into a jumble. "That's evil." "It's not bad. That's evil, Dad. It's effective." "That's worse." Naruto laughed despite himself. "This was planned by you and Nagato. Nagato said it might do you some good. And you were like, great, and if he hates it, I get to be a sword guy online." "Sword art online." Naruto pointed at him. "You fixed that fast." Now Kushina was leaning against the table, laughing with her whole face, the type that made her shoulders shake even when she tried to hold it back in. "He's been yapping about it all day. Should have known." That was actually hurt Minato. "I was explaining the technology." "You were hovering," she said. "I was not hovering." Naruto faced Kushina. Was he hovering? He was up. "Arising. Close to it," Kushina remarked. "For a long time," Naruto added. Minato looked from his wife to his son, and for a moment, he seemed to consider defending himself correctly. Then his eyes fell treacherously on the box. Naruto grabbed it. Kushina grabbed it. They were both silent. Minato looked up again. Naruto's smile grew wider slowly. "Oh, you want to open it so much." Minato didn't say anything. Kushina put a palm to her mouth, but it did nothing to hide her smile. "He truly does." Naruto stepped up and put both hands flat on either side of the box. "He hasn't opened it as yet." He just leaned over it, peering down as if he had suddenly become the gatekeeper to Minato's dreams. "What was your game plan?" Naruto said. "I go home and remark, 'lame,' and go outside." "I didn't have a plan." "You had a scheme. It was a potential worth changing for." Kushina laughed once again. "Which means plan." Naruto nodded sincerely. "That signifies plan." Minato groaned, and this time he didn't bother to hide the slight smile that came with it. It was slight, but it softened his whole face, made him look less like the composed adult in the room and more like someone who had been caught with his hand halfway into the cookie jar. "I may have thought that you would be less interested in the slow parts," he said cautiously. Naruto gaped. "The slow bits, menus, tutorials, character setup, reading item descriptions, stat options. You mean game, sum of game." Kushina pointed to Naruto. "He can't even read directions for quick noodles." "I know," Minato answered. Naruto looked insulted. "I can do noodles." "You boil water and hope," Kushina remarked. "That's cooking." "That is survival." Minato's smile broadened a bit and Naruto saw it, and it only made him more determined. He gave the top of the box a rap. But yet again. Slow. Against his will, Minato's gaze followed each tap. Naruto's grin sharpened. Before I didn't care. Minato's expression became suspicious. Naruto leaned a bit forward. But I am, kind of. Kushina made a happy noise. Spite. A potent motivator. It's not spite, Naruto said. Both his parents turned to look at him. Maybe for a second Naruto's look became serious, then he grinned again. Okay. It's a little spite. Minato looked at him. That's not really a good cause to try some fancy neural interface technology. Nerd helmet, Naruto corrected. Nerve gear. Geek hat. Kushina grimly nodded. The boys said his piece. Minato stared at the ceiling, waiting. Naruto eventually managed to get his fingers beneath the cover, but he didn't open it yet. The box did nothing, yet the room had altered about it. 10 minutes ago it was a costly thing Naruto didn't care about. It was proof, now, that his father had attempted and failed to get one over on him. It was precious, not for the game, but because it was hilarious that Minato wanted it, and Naruto had leverage in a foolish way. His eyes were sparkling with defiance as he glanced at his father. Naruto dragged the word out. So, since this is my present. Minato's lips pressed into a line. Kushina was really thrilled. Naruto knocked again on the lid. First time for me. Minato stood there for a bit, his hands at his sides, his eyes flickering again to the box and back to Naruto. Then he nodded in a most dignified manner. Sure. He's dying inside, Kushina stated instantly. No, I'm not. Naruto laughed and then he raised the lid. The cardboard softened as he tugged it with a slow, soothing motion, and all three of them leaned in against themselves, including Kushina. The headset was within the molded package. The object was sleek and dark with a smooth surface that reflected the kitchen light off its curved corners. It looked less what Naruto had imagined, after all the talk, more like a fine helmet left half-finished than a giant sci-fi contraption. It was looking at him, and so was Kushina. Minato's expression stilled, not smug, not delighted, just odd. Naruto recognized this and didn't tease him for a moment. But then Kushina ruined the mood. That's a very expensive bowl, she said. Naruto cracked up, laughing so hard he had to put a hand on the table for support. Minato shut his eyes. It's not a bowl. Kushina leaned forward, head cocked. Well, if I put fruit in. Don't put fruit in it. Naruto smiled and cautiously reached in with both hands to lift the headpiece. It was lighter than he thought. The surface was cool to his fingers, too smooth, almost, with small seams and ports he didn't identify. He rolled it over, felt the interior padding, the shape, the DD seriousness of the O device. Amusement there was, but something else hung in the air. Wonder, maybe, not enough to talk it, but enough for Minato to hear it. Kushina saw it too, though she was more delicate in her pretending not to see. Naruto tugged his headset up a little. So this is what you were trying to steal from me. Minato sighed. I didn't intend to steal it. You were getting yourself emotionally ready to inherit it. Kushina snapped her fingers and pointed to Naruto. That's the rub. Minato turned to his wife. This is too much fun for you. I am enjoying it just right. Naruto moved the headgear back towards himself, thumbs pressing lightly along the sides to test the form. All right, nerd hat, we'll see whether you're worth my dad embarrassing himself. Minato raised an eyebrow. I didn't make a fool of myself. Kushina and Naruto answered in unison. You did. Minato stood there for a moment, defeated by democracy. Then he reached for the headset, his voice back to that meticulous, technical calm, albeit the tips of his ears had gone just a shade pink. At least let me help you set it up right. Naruto pulled the headset back to his chest. Why, so you can sign in first by accident. Minato glanced at him. Kushina leaned on the table, smiling. Naruto reciprocated the smile. The box sat open between them, no longer strange, undisturbed, or merely an expensive item on the table. It had been part of the room. It had already become a sore point, like everything else in their house. The laughter did not die down suddenly, it was the first to thin. Naruto still kept the headset against his chest, one arm wrapped around it, because Minato may actually take it away if he let go. Kushina was still leaning against the table, a satisfied grin on her face, her cheeks slightly elevated from laughter. Minato still appeared too serene for a man who had just been caught red-handed in his own kitchen. Between them the box was open, black cardboard folded back, molded plastic gleamed beneath the kitchen lights. For a few seconds, it was easy. Then Minato reached into the box and pulled the instructions out. Not fast, not much, just one smooth gesture, careful enough that it reshaped the moment. Naruto spotted it and his grin faltered somewhat. Let's get this set up right, first, before you make any heroic decisions involving advanced hardware, Minato added, no longer mocking. Naruto opened his mouth as if he had a quip ready, but Minato didn't look up from the manual. With the quiet certainty of a guy who has definitely read it twice previously, his thumb ran along the edge of the pages to the setup section. That killed the joy of debate. Kushina saw the change, too. She pushed herself away from the table and turned back toward the stove, but she didn't really go back to cooking. She moved more slowly now, stirred the pot once, turned the heat down, wiped the counter where there was nothing to wipe. She was attentive to them, without her eyes being on them. Naruto held the headset for another second before eventually handing it out. Minato took it gently. The difference was instantly. In Naruto's hands the nerve gear had seemed like a stolen gift, some elegant toy gained via hatred. In Minato's it became equipment. He turned it over, looked at the ports, checked the cushioning, and placed it on the table, inside up. The movement was practiced, clinical almost, but not chilly. Naruto had seen his father like this before, typically when he was mending something delicate or treating a scrape Naruto insisted didn't hurt.
Minato took out the rest of the goods one by one. Power cable. Thin setup card. A little device for network pairing. Warranty booklet. Naruto knew immediately he would never make it. The joke is steadily replaced with a task, the pieces scatter across the table.
Naruto stood beside him at first, shuffling from foot to foot. He saw Minato disconnect the cords, watched him trace one end with his fingers, then attach it to the charging base. From the headset there was a flash of a tiny indicator, pale blue against black plastic. It was the first indication the monster was alive. Naruto found himself leaning closer. Minato noticed but said nothing. "Bring your laptop," he told them. Naruto blinked, and glanced toward the hall. "Mine." "Yes." Naruto hesitated like he wanted to ask why, then turned and left. His strides down the hall were brisk but not hasty, and it was only then that Kushina glanced back over her shoulder. Neither she nor Minato spoke for a moment. The kitchen seemed odd without Naruto there. More quiet, aged.
Kushina's features had relaxed in a way she normally hid from him.
"Well, you hope this will help," she remarked. Minato glared down at the headphones. "Yeah, no, maybe, no, I think, yes." Kushina pursed her lips, then nodded once, turning back before Naruto returned. By the time he returned with his laptop under one arm and the charger cord trailing behind, her look had cleared to something lighter. Not joking exactly but steady. Naruto slammed the laptop down on the table with less care than Minato liked. Minato pushed it further away from the brink without glancing at him. Naruto noticed. He did not grumble. They sat side by side at the table, close enough that his knee hit the table leg when he moved. Minato opened the laptop, entered the password after Naruto provided it to him and began the setup procedure. Naruto was surprised at how slow the download of the necessary software was. The progress bar inched across the screen in small, arrogant increments and the wait made the room too still. Naruto hated to wait. You could see it in everything he did. His fingers tapped once on the tabletop before he caught himself. His heel tapped beneath the chair. He leaned back, then forward, and groped for the setup card for anything to hold. He turned it over, read maybe 3 words and put it down again.
Minato looked at the download bar. "You're coming home later," he remarked without glancing up from the TV.
Naruto stopped for half a second. No ice. Innocent. Fresh caught. Then he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Practice goes long. Track practice is done at 5. Sometimes I run after." "I know." That answer hits differently. Naruto glanced at him. Minato's eyes stayed on the laptop, calm and unreadable in the illumination of the screen. "I know you run after. I know you take the long way home. I know you've been stopping round the old courts even though you don't play there anymore." Kushina's spoon decelerated in the saucepan. Naruto was the first to turn away, his chin shifting as if he was chewing on a response and decided none of it's worth speaking. The progress bar went from 12% to 13%. Minato clicked through a permissions box and let the following file load. "I'm not asking because I want to catch you doing something wrong. You keep moving, like if you stop, everything's gonna catch up to you, and I'm asking why." Naruto shrugged his shoulders. His jacket was open over his shirt, the collar askew where he'd earlier yanked off the strap of his bag. He looked younger than he intended, and more fatigued than he would ever acknowledge under the kitchen light. There was a little abrasion near one knuckle, mostly healed over. He lowered his head, his hair falling into his eyes, and he didn't push it back. This time he didn't refute it at once. Minato viewed that as a go-ahead. When Sasuke transferred, I figured it would be challenging. Naruto's eyes flashed toward him again, sharp now.
Minato did not shy away from the name. That would have been preferable.
He was your best friend, Minato added. Neither of you wanted to admit you were losing a competition to see who was the best friend. Naruto made a little noise. Almost a laugh, but not quite. The download kept going. 18%. Sakura left at the same time, too. Bad enough, Minato remarked. Different school, better academic track, better program, greater prospects. All reasonable reasons. None of that makes the empty seat any less empty. Naruto's fingers curled slowly against his sleeve. Kushina turned the burner down to a slow simmer. She didn't interrupt. She was standing at the counter, her back half turned, providing the gift of not staring but being there.
Naruto looked at the laptop screen, but didn't see it. "They're not dead," he said. His voice was low.
Minato nodded his head. No, so it shouldn't be that big of a deal.
"That is not the way we work." Naruto shut his mouth.
The room breathed. Around them, the laptop was humming quietly. The soft click of the charging dock. The smell of dinner grew stronger while it sat on low heat. Outside, the blue dusk pressed against the windows, brightening the kitchen by way of contrast.
Minato plugged in the network pairing device and waited for the prompt. His hands still moved with calm purpose, but his voice stayed with Naruto. "Your routine with them is gone," he remarked. "You lost the people who made it feel like the day had a shape." Then Hinata. He halted there because he didn't want to step carelessly, not because he didn't know how to finish.
Anyway, Naruto's whole posture shifted. Not too much. Just enough. He stooped his shoulders. He crossed his arms over his chest. His expression became blank, that deadly young blank that didn't imply calm. It meant every door had slammed shut all at once. Then Minato glanced at him. "Just a moment, so you and Hinata broke up." Naruto gazed out the window. The glass returned only fragments of him. Blonde hair, the pale form of his face, the dark line of his jacket. He didn't look angry. That could have been easier. Anger offered him a place to put his hands, his voice, his feet. This was worse because it left him seated. Minato didn't inquire why. It made a difference. The rest of them had questioned why. The teachers had requested kindly. Kushina had tried it once, and stopped when Naruto's answer sounded too sharp. Friends from the former school had texted, claiming they weren't asking. Hinata, even, who was silent, had stared at him at the conclusion like she wanted him to offer her something she could understand.
He hadn't. He still didn't. Minato clicked through yet another setup prompt.
32%. I don't need you to tell me, Minato said.
Naruto gulped. It was small, and Minato spotted it. "I'm not going to make you say something you're clearly not ready to say. But I do need you to understand that not saying it out loud doesn't make it go away. It's been coming out anyway." Naruto's eyes dropped. Minato reached over and straightened the headset cord so it would not bend near the port.
"In the fights," he went on. "In the climbing. In the dares you pretend not to care about. In the way you leave before anybody can ask where you're going. In how angry you become when someone attempts to worry about you."
Naruto's voice was coarser this time. "I'm not trying to make everybody worry." "I know." That remark cut him quieter than an allegation could have. Now Minato shifted a little in his chair. The laptop kept downloading between the two of them, its little bar inching forward, but neither of them looked at it for the time. Minato responded, "You're not bad. You aren't broken. You aren't some problem we have to fix by putting a helmet on your head." Naruto managed the smallest, bitterest smile. "Could have fooled me." Minato worked through that. He did not shrink from it.
"That's fair," he replied. "I was like that." Naruto gazed at him again, surprised at the admission.
Minato's face remained same, but there was a tiredness behind it now. Not weak, just the truth.
"I bought it thinking maybe that's a place for some of the things you're carrying. Some rules attached. Something that can push you without depending on whether your friends are still at your school, or whether a relationship works, or whether you know what to do with yourself when the day gets too quiet."
Naruto looked down to the nerve gear. Between them lay the headset, its cord plugged in, its indicator light pulsing softly, like a pulse. "It's also," Minato replied,
Softly, a little because I wanted to test it. Naruto snorted. Not exactly a laugh. Close enough that Kushina's shoulders relaxed across the room. Minato turned back to the laptop and clicked on the following question. The screen went to a Seer registration screen. What am I supposed to do? Inquired Naruto. His voice was still low, but he had leaned forward. That was all. Minato pulled the laptop a little closer. Start with your account. Real info first. The game profile comes next. Naruto moved the laptop towards himself and began typing with 2 fingers that made Minato visibly suffer in silence. His shoulders were still tight, but his mind had found something to latch onto. Name. Birth date. Authorization system guardian consent. Naruto only rolled his eyes at that part but didn't make a joke about it. Minato signed where he had to, read all the warnings before agreeing, and ignored Naruto's agitated shift beside him every time he took longer than Naruto believed he should. The software is installed in chunks. The nerve gear had been upgraded. Game client has been downloaded. Every few minutes the system asked for another confirmation, another configuration, another calibration step that couldn't be done until the headset was on. Minato spoke only what was necessary. Now he didn't go on. He spoke in a low, matter-of-fact voice, informing Naruto what the system would do, what he would feel, why his body would relax once the full dive began, and why he needed to be lying down or sitting securely before commencing. Naruto was a good listener. When Kushina carried a bowl over, she put it down by his elbow without a word. One hand held chopsticks and read over Minato's shoulder, chin forward, eyes narrowed as if the screen had challenged him personally. Sauce was on the corner of his mouth. Kushina brushed past. She wiped it with her thumb. Naruto flinched, insulted. Mom, she continued, eat like a person. Minato didn't smile this time. But his eyes did. The heavier part of the talk didn't come back completely. It hung about the room like the weather after rain, softening the hard edges without drowning them. Naruto didn't suddenly explain himself. He never said Sasuke's name again. He didn't use Sakura's name. He obviously didn't mention Hinata's. But he decided to stay. That was all he had to say. He did not go away, but stayed seated at the table. He let Minato illustrate how the menus opened. He watched the progress bars tick away one by one. What if the connection drops? He asked. What if the power goes out? What if I have to move in real life and the game thinks I'm somewhere else? Minato answered each question seriously and carefully. Each answer seemed to soothe something within Naruto, not completely but enough to stop his knee jumping under the table. When the last update was finished, it was completely dark outside the windows. The lights gleamed in the glass now, catching the 3 of them in fragments. Kushina clearing up at the counter, Minato sitting straight back next the laptop, Naruto leaning forward with his elbows on the table, nerve gear in his hands. A quiet chime from the system told him the configuration was complete. Naruto read the message, and fell silent for a moment. Then he hesitantly poked 2 fingers against the side of the headset, not kidding, not claiming it, simply feeling the cold plastic under his skin. Minato watched him without a word. The voice was quieter than it had been.
So all that. And I just slap it on? Minato nodded his head.
When you're ready. The words hung there a bit too gently. Whenever you want. Naruto kept his fingers on the edge of the headset, his thumb running along the smooth, black arc. His skin was pallid and steady with the blinking little indicator light. Ready. Wait. Let him not rush. Which made it somewhat better. He looked at it as if it may answer for him.
Kushina must have experienced the room tilting again, for right then she chose to approach with the empty cardboard insert from the box under one arm with the swift, vicious intention of a woman who had determined seriousness had been granted life long enough.
She leaned around Naruto, grabbed one of the smaller packing pieces off the table, and looked at it with an overdone show of concern.
Slowly Naruto raised his head. What is going on?
Kushina didn't respond like a regular person. She put the cardboard piece on the top of her head. It sat wrong, one corner flopping over her red hair like the saddest helmet ever devised. She straightened her back, let her arms hang stiffly at her sides, and turned toward them with dead, vacant eyes. System on, she stated in a monotone voice. Nerd robot Minato online. Naruto blinked. Quote. Minato shut his eyes. Kushina's head turned to the real nerve gear with minuscule, mechanical clicks. Scanning device, she repeated. Object detected. Costly bowl. Secondary function. Taking a present from a child.
Naruto gasped as if he'd been punched in the gut and struggled not to laugh. Minato opened his eyes a little, looking weary. Kushina. Her cardboard hat slid half an inch down her head. She fixed it with one stiff robot hand. Voice recognition activated, she said. Main user. Minato Namikaze. Profession. Dad. Subclass. Nerd. Naruto bellowed. He leaned on the table, laughing into his arm, his shoulders bouncing hard enough to bump the laptop. Minato quietly put out a hand, catching it before it fell over the edge, his gaze still on his wife. Kushina went on, completely committed now. Her face was a blank, save for the giveaway of laughter lurking at the corners of her mouth, and she turned to Naruto with the same stiff little mechanical clicks. Secondary user detected. Name. Naruto Uzumaki. Risk factor. High. Reading comprehension. Low. Has ignored instructions in 98% of known cases. Naruto looked up, his cheeks flushed with laughter. Hey. Suggested action, Kushina continued. Distract subject with sword game before subject climbs municipal property. Naruto pointed at her, still laughing too hard to seem insulted. That is so FC ked up. Minato rubbed at the bridge of his nose. The fight had already gone from his face. The heavy seriousness in his eyes had vanished, replaced by that helpless look that came over him when Kushina threw the whole home into turmoil and there was simply no stopping it. Kushina glanced back at him. Calculated original plan, she said. Son refuses gift. Father was unfortunately forced to use the gift. Success rate. 0%, because the father cannot stop explaining the gift. Buy a gift for my son. Naruto hit the table once. Minato's lips trembled. That one little crack was all it took for Kushina. She lifted her arms before her and shuffled around the table in stiff jerky steps. Beep, boop. I am Minato. I adore manuals. I read warning labels for enjoyment. My favorite food is correctly configured software. Naruto choked. Stop, stop, oh my god. Finally Minato sighed, but even that sounded dangerously like laughing. That's a lie. Kushina stopped in her tracks and turned her head towards him. Correction received, she said. Stolen from my son's video game. New favorite food. Naruto slumped his head against the table. Minato smiled and relented. Nothing much. Quiet, but enough of it, and the room altered with it. The tension hadn't gone away, because the talk hadn't mattered. It disappeared because Kushina had stuck her hand in the center of it, grabbed the ugliest, heaviest section by the collar and put a cardboard hat on it. The headgear was still present. So were Sasuke, Sakura, Hinata, and everything else Naruto still wouldn't reveal. But now Naruto laughed, loudly laughing, and for a few moments that was enough. Kushina finally stopped walking like a rigid robot and Naruto's laughing was still coming in short irregular bursts. So far down had the cardboard packing piece fallen on her head that one corner nearly covered her eye. She remained there for one last second, rigid, arms in front of her, face blank with horrible concentration. Final diagnosis, she said. Family spirit rebuilt, dignity destroyed, mission accomplished. Naruto had the mistake of glancing at Minato. Minato was working so hard to be an adult. He never did. It wasn't a full chuckle, not like Kushina's or Naruto's, but his mouth twitched, his eyes softened, and his shoulders trembled once before he turned aside and pretended to check the laptop again. Naruto immediately pointed at him. You laughed. Quote. I breathed out. You laughed. I breathed amusedly. Kushina took the cardboard off her head, and delicately tossed it onto the table. That's robot speak for laughed. Minato closed the laptop halfway and the setup screen glowed beneath. It's all set up. The account is ready, the gaming client is up to date, and the system passed its tests. He can log in soon the device completes its last startup cycle. Naruto leaned forward trying to see the screen over his shoulder. How long? Just a few minutes, Naruto moaned and slumped back in his chair as if those few minutes had attacked him personally. That's forever. Kushina reached over and flicked him lightly on the forehead. He pulled back. Ow, that wasn't ow-worthy. You don't know my pain. I was bringing you. Naruto opened his mouth and shut it again, knowing even he couldn't win that one. Minato stood and collected the stray papers that littered the table, organizing the handbook, warranty information, and setup card into a neat pile. He moved with that silent, meticulous efficiency that always made Naruto feel like he was seeing someone who had already prepared 3 steps ahead. The power line was out of the way, so no one would trip over it. The laptop was shifted to the side. The nerve gear stayed in the center, charged and waiting, its little light flickering soft blue against the dark shell. Kushina watched Naruto watching it. For once, she didn't tease him immediately away. Naruto fell silent again, but not in the same locked-up way as before. His eyes were roving over the headset, no longer with distrust, but with the reluctant interest of a man who had already decided he was going to do something and was trying not to look too keen about it. His blonde hair was still tousled from where he'd shoved both hands through it earlier. The collar of his jacket was twisted over one shoulder. In the kitchen light he seemed sleepy, but awake, too. Concentrated. Kushina's face relaxed. Then, being Kushina, she deliberately messed things up. She put both hands on the table and leaned towards him. Listen to me. Naruto glanced up. There was something in her tone that made him stand straighter, without thinking. Kushina could laugh all she wanted, but when her voice dropped like that, every survival instinct Naruto learnt growing up was telling him to listen. What? She gestured towards the nerve gear. I don't know how this strange helmet world works. It's not. Minato whispered softly behind her. Kushina held out one finger to him without looking at him. Minato halted. Naruto's lips quivered. Kushina watched her boy. I don't know what goes on in there. I don't know what sort of craziness they allow teenagers get into. I don't know if there are females in little clothes, odd bathhouse locations, kissing games, or whatever else nerds are inventing these days. Naruto's face went through phases. First bewilderment. Then fear. Then the offense. Mummy, I am speaking. I haven't even logged in. And I am telling you in advance. Minato turned away slightly, one hand to his mouth. Naruto noticed it right away. Daddy. Minato's voice was too flat. Your mother speaks. You guys are so odd. Kushina leaned forward, her red hair falling over one shoulder, eyes narrowing with the dramatic gravity of a battlefield commander giving last instructions. If I see you doing anything perverted in there, she added slow and clear, I'll beat you so hard your real body feels it through the helmet. Naruto's ears immediately turned red. That's not how it works. Minato let out a little, hazardous noise. Naruto turned around to him. Don't laugh. I didn't. You most assuredly did. Kushina rapped her knuckles on the table once. Look at me. Naruto spun around, still red-faced and hurting. She pointed two fingers at her own eyes. Then at his. I know. No, you shall not. I am your mother. I know always. There is no such thing. That is something. Finally Minato intervened, although his demeanor was too placid to be innocent. Fair enough, the game is built around combat progression and exploration, not that kind of behavior. Kushina turned slowly to face him. Minato hesitated. Naruto watched, hopeful that someone else was going to get attacked. Kushina cocked her head. You sound very certain. Minato blinked. Once. Naruto's grin was back as the morning. Oh, Minato's posture straightened, one meticulous inch. I read the detail of the content. Said Kushina. Naruto leant back in his chair, unexpectedly happy. No, let him talk. He examined the perverted settings. I didn't look into too fast, you knew it. I knew because responsible parents check ratings and system restrictions before letting their kid use new media. Kushina looked up at him. Naruto looked at him. Looking between them, Minato seemed to realize, too late, that this was not a sentence that assisted him. Kushina nodded slowly. Settings perversion reviewed by nerd robot Minato. Naruto clapped a palm to his mouth. Minato let out a sigh. I'll examine the router. Get out, said Kushina. I shall not run away. But he did leave the kitchen, for sure. Naruto snickered to himself as Minato walked away down the corridor, his footfalls quieter than they had any right to be for someone trying to get away from embarrassment. Kushina watched him leave with a delighted little smile before turning back to Naruto. The smile remained. The warning did as well. I mean it, she continued, quieter now, but no less sincere. You are good. Naruto rolled his eyes, but the blush on his ears hadn't totally vanished. I'm not a stalker. Yeah, I know. That answer sucked the wind out of him a bit. Kushina leaned across the table and stroked his untidy bangs back from his forehead, quick and caring before he could get away. Her hand still had a slight smell of soap and cooking spices. Naruto grimaced, but didn't move away fast enough to hide that he let her do it. I don't mean it because I think you are, she said. I'm telling you this because you are my son and one of the few pleasures that life has for me is to embarrass you. Naruto gave her a look. Then he snorted against his will. That's fucked up. Motherhood, he said. That's not good. She grinned and stood up, taking the bowls from the counter. Your father and I are going to clean up.
Stay here until he says it's ready. Don't press buttons because you're impatient. Naruto looked insulted again. I don't do that one. Kushina looked at the laptop. Then the headphones. Then at him. Naruto stared at her for a moment or two, then looked aside. I won't. Good. She began for the sink, but paused, looking back once again with narrowed eyes. And Naruto, he sighed. Again she pointed at him. No kink stuff, mother. Her laughter followed her into the kitchen proper, bright and warm, and Naruto fell deeper into his chair with both hands over his face. The router's fine, Minato yelled down the corridor, way too calmly. Don't worry about it, Kushina said immediately. Did you check out the pervert settings? Naruto sighed into his palms, the weight of the moment weighing on him. Minato didn't respond, and it just made Naruto feel more awkward. The nerve gear was sitting on the table, ready to go. And as the soothing sounds of the evening played on, Kushina rinsed the dishes, and Minato came back with a dignified expression that few appreciated, all part of the nightly ritual of the house. Naruto dropped his hands, gazing back at the headset, a small blush of embarrassment still on his face. But behind that his interest remained and even grew. The white didn't become a world all at once. Naruto expected the ground, sky, noise, something. Instead the light widened out to a vast expanse with no walls, no ceiling, and no true floor underneath him but a faint reflective surface that mirrored his shape under his feet. It was not a room. It was inside. It felt like being within a loading screen that had decided to be a location. Naruto looked down. There was his body, although not quite so. Not his school clothing. His coat not even close to what he had on the sofa. In front of him was a man in simple novice armor. A rough dark tunic, stiff boots, cheap leather bracers, and a simple chest piece that looked to be crafted by someone who disliked style. Beside it was a plain sword. The face was the kind of blank ordinary, the stance neutral, the hair a drab placeholder color. The whole thing felt less like a human and more like a mannequin waiting for a store to open. Naruto stared at it. The figure glanced back at him. That's it. Next to the armored mannequin a translucent window slid open. Choose a character. Below it options formed themselves in the air. Body types, height, hairs, face, voice less than BR, greater than less than BR, greater than. Preview of initial equipment. Naruto moved closer, boots making no sound on the weird colorless floor. He raised a hand and waved it in the face of the mannequin. Not a thing. He tilted to one side. The mannequin was still. Naruto's mouth curled. You look like you get hit by doors. But the system did not respond. His hand went toward the first option, but he stopped himself from touching it. The menu pointed out, nonetheless, more in answer to intention than to his finger. Naruto pulled his hand back a little, still creepy. The menu hung there. Naruto looked around the white, empty space, as if waiting for someone to explain it to him. No Minato. Kushina no. No mocking robot voice. Only him, the illuminated menu, and the world's saddest new warrior. He snorted and took face. The dummy jerked. Its features melted and reformed and Naruto winced involuntarily. Cheeks shifted. Jaw tightened. Eyes rolled. Nose twitched. There was a list of sliders, each having considerably more detail than he wished to have. Width of brow. Angle of eye. Bridge of nose. Shape of mouth. Chin. Naruto glanced. Then his face fell slack. No, he backed out, and hunted until he found a less difficult choice. Scan base look. That sounded more annoying. He took it. A narrow ring of light crossed over him from head to foot. For a moment the space hummed quietly as the mannequin before him reconfigured into something far more familiar. Blonde hair, eyes blue, his face, his physique. Naruto stopped. The duplicate was standing there in the cheap armor, looking back at him with his own features, his own restless posture now mirrored in digital immobility. Strange in a way he hadn't been prepared for. The other thing was mirrors. Photos were another matter. This time was different. He was himself standing outside of himself, wearing awful footwear. He moved closer, oblivious. The model's blonde hair had tumbled down to the same disheveled shape as his genuine hair, though cleaner than it generally achieved in real life. His face was just right for making him uncomfortable. Same eyes, same schnoz, same lips that constantly looked like it was about to say something it shouldn't. Even the little features were there, near enough that Naruto stroked one thumb over the side of his own face as if checking to see if the game had taken something.
Huh, and the system generated another prompt. Did the base look nice? Naruto looked down at himself, then at the height selection. His eyes squinted as a slow thought crossed his face. He chose height. A slider appeared. The number next to it was his real height. Naruto stared at it for a bit, then lifted it a little, just enough to see a change. The model stretched a little and Naruto cocked his head, still him, but taller. He pushed it up another inch and the model grew again. Naruto's lips twisted into a smile. All right, one more inch, said he. Now the model was something like 3 inches taller than Naruto was in reality, still near enough to look natural if you didn't know him, but different enough that Naruto absolutely noticed. And bigger in presence, somehow, merely from the height. The basic armor still looked awful, but at least now the mannequin wearing it looked like someone who could maybe talk down to people. Naruto folded his arms and stared. Yeah, he gave one nod. That's better.
The system judged nobody, which was excellent, because Naruto didn't need judgment from a glowing menu.
He glanced at the rest without much patience. Blonde hair remained, eyes still blue, face gripped him. One test line made him recoil so sharply that cancelled the deeper option straight away and voice held him. He tried, but the equipment preview was still but ugly. Basic longsword, light armor for starters, plain boots. No cloak, no showy coat, no spectacular hero gear. Naruto frowned and leaned closer to the model. He murmured, "You still look like an extra." It looked back at him, expressionless, unimpressive. A taller copy of himself. Naruto sighed. Whatever, we'll work that out. Last prompt popped up.
Complete character build? Naruto paused over the menu.
For a second he considered making himself older, harder, less recognizable, something that wouldn't echo school hallways, vacant seats, awkward goodbyes, and spoken remarks. But the model already represented him, simply taller. That was enough deception. Eventually, Naruto said, yes. The surrounds light up, the character model moving backward into him, or maybe he moved forward into it, it's impossible to tell. It was like cold water and static, this shifting sensation, and then it was gone. A new window popped up. Welcome to Sword Art Online. Naruto looked down as the cheap armor fell around his body. The boots were stiff and the bracers creaked with every movement of his wrist. The sword at his side was genuine heavy. Naruto's mouth twisted into a faint expression against his will. All right, he murmured. 3 inches taller and yet dressing like a tool. The world came into being around him. This time he could see the earth below him, hear the sounds and see the sky above. Then Naruto Uzumaki opened his eyes. In Town of Beginnings. The tutorial was divided around Naruto, each one managing to show the same impossible thing differently. It was only a game. That was the portion his brain kept trying to remember. Menus appeared whenever he wanted them, item names popping up when his sight settled on them. There was a loaf on a bakery shelf with a little price tag underneath it that read, Beginner's Roll. A rack of wooden training swords turned into, Practice Blade. The fundamental weapon on his hip said, Fundamental Longsword, and in his view it was as if the universe itself had labels. This was obviously a game. But suddenly the breeze ruffled his hair, and the sun warmed the back of his neck. The scent of fresh bread floated from the bakery, rich and buttery, and his stomach growled even though he'd eaten at home. That was the part that threw him off.
The tutorial started with fundamental movement. It was so simplistic that it almost insulted Naruto.
He passed glowing route markings through the plaza, down a big street, around a fountain and onto a quieter side lane. Walking, running and jumping all worked as predicted. The technology made the motions feel normal, even if his character was 3 inches taller, but it didn't prevent him from misjudging the surroundings. This he noticed when his boot hooked on a projecting stone. The pain in his toe was so acute that he flinched. It wasn't a bad pain. Not like hitting his foot on a table leg, but enough to make him gaze at the stone like it had insulted him. Then a small notification emerged at the edge of his sight.
Environmental collision safe zone, no damage. The message was practically civil.
His toe still argued with him. That became the rhythm of the teaching. Game logic, real feeling, game logic, genuine feel. He could call a menu, which would effortlessly emerge as a translucent screen in front of him. Focusing on the inventory allowed the tab to slide into view. He could identify his sword's name, durability, and starting stats without anyone explaining where the info originated. He could choose things without touching them, because the system read his purpose and not his motion.
But too frequently he'd turn a bend too fast, feel his shoulder brush against a stone wall. He'd step under the shade of a building, and feel the cool air on his skin. He would pass the smithy, and the smell of heated metal, smoke and oil would fill his nose. He'd pass the fountain and sprinkle his face with mist. It was incredible. Non-stop. He was reminded of every convenience. Every aspect made that illusion seem like a lie. Even the bakery nearly overpowered his senses. The sign outside identified itself as Town Bakery when he looked up. The loaves in the window named themselves one by one: beginner's roll, rye loaf, honey bread, all with pricing that meant nothing to him yet. He bought the cheapest thing because the suggestion made it easy, and because the scent had already beaten him. The roll in his palm was wrapped in rough fabric, warm to the touch. Actually warm. He held it a bit longer than needed, savoring the heat pressed into his hand. When he tore open the crust, it split softly, and a light steam rose from inside. He bit. His face stilled. It tasted like bread. Not perfect, maybe. A little too clean and simple, like the game knew the essence of bread better than all the little, imperfect aspects of real food. But it was warm, soft, faintly delicious, near, with crumbs on his fingertips. A tooltip emerged as he stared at the half-eaten roll. Beginner's roll restores a modest amount of hunger, minor comfort bonus. Naruto gazed at the words, then at the bread itself. The game had assigned a stat to the bread. Despite that, the bread still tasted wonderful. That was incredible. The combat lesson made more sense to him than the menus did. Not because he grasped the rules yet, but because moving was moving, and Naruto had always trusted his body faster than his intellect. When the tutorial brought him into the training yard, the dirt under his boots changed from clean stone to packed earth. The sword at his hip rested there until he wanted it, and the moment he thought about drawing it, his hand moved with the system's help. The blade came free cleanly, no unpleasant scraping, no embarrassing angle. The game knew how drawing a sword was supposed to operate, even if Naruto didn't. That almost annoyed him. Almost. The basic longsword felt comfortable enough in his hand, enabling him understand the main principle instantly. He wasn't an expert yet. He was a little harsh in his stance, a little impatient in his timing, and he swung too hard, trying to muscle the dummy instead of working with the system's rhythm. But he could swing and cut and guard. The game has turned his desire into effective motion, giving him the fundamental competence of a player character, but there's still opportunity to improve in critical areas. Horizontal cut, pushy guard, step, reset. The instruction revealed pale guidelines in the air, and when Naruto followed them, his body moved cleaner than it would have on its own. When he rushed, the hits still landed, but weaker. When he overcommitted, the recovery felt sluggish. When he attacked too often, the stamina bar depleted, and the environment replied by making his limbs feel heavy. That portion was dreadful. He could still breathe. He felt his chest rise and fall, felt air sucked through his mouth, felt his body complaining in a simple, game-filtered way. The stamina bar was only a bar, brilliant and yellow on the fringe of his vision, yet when it fell low, his body knew before his head did. His arms were getting tired. His legs lost their bounce. His lungs labored harder. He had felt winded by a video game, and then the sword skills tutorial. The prompt started with the move name, Sword Skill, Spike Frenzy. A small description appeared beneath it. Basic one-handed thrust skill. Set stance and commit to forward momentum. System aid will activate upon the suitable trigger. Naruto read it twice despite himself. The first time he entered the stance, the sword slightly lit but failed to release. He had shifted too early. On the second effort, he kept the posture longer, experiencing the system tightening around him like a spring's tension. Light crawled up the sword's edge, burning red, orange and brilliant. Then it pulled, not controlling him or taking over, but helping. His body sprang forward with a rapid, strong burst, faster and sharper than any of his physical actions. The blade connected with the dummy with a satisfying thud, a red damage number flaring for a second above it before vanishing. A damage number, useful, familiar, part of the game. But the hit still sent a thrill up his arm, an unusual sensation, and he froze to gaze. That was the start of the tutorial, which was a whirl of systems falling into place. He concentrated and the item names appeared. Quest markers floated over NPCs. His inventory absorbed goods without pockets, fused coins into one. The map filled up with his steps. He'd flicked the sword aside, and the blade had returned to his side in a single, clean move, so seamless it felt as if the world had simply cut out the inconvenient portion. It was not some clumsy physical gesture. That should have made it feel less real. Somehow, it made it stranger. Because every time the game aided him, the world around him kept insisting on being alive.
A shop bell rung when he arrived and again when he departed. His extra height made him misunderstand a low-hanging sign, and though safe zone damage was disabled, the dull hit against his forehead nevertheless made him halt and hold a hand there while the tooltip gently labeled the sign as Old Market Noticeboard. Flowers in a courtyard bent when the wind went across them. His boots left faint imprints in the dust that vanished only after a few seconds. The fountain water seemed cool enough that when the mist brushed his face, he believed it before he remembered not to. By the end of the tutorial, Naruto stood near the edge of the training yard with the completion window shining in front of him.
Basic tutorial complete. Below it, the following recommendations waited. Explore the town of beginnings. Starting skills register.
Take on beginner quests. Don't fight outside of town until you're adequately prepared. Naruto stared at the warning for a long time. The game was guiding him, aiding, sorting, smoothing out the basics so he didn't have to learn every single movement. But the pain in his toe was a very real thing. The bread was real tasting. His respiration was regular. The sword hit with enough force. He was there in starter armor, a little over 3 inches taller than he should be, staring at a city that was obviously false and somehow strangely genuine. Gradually, his panic was replaced by a brighter expression. Not quite, never silent, but addicted.
A board fastened to the side of a broad stone archway marked the end of the tutorial.
Naruto almost walked past it at first. It did not look important from a distance. Just a black wooden board filled with notices, shreds of parchment, stamped demands, and little folded papers pinned under brass tacks. Some were neat, some were crooked, a few flapped slightly in the breeze, even though none of them fell loose. Players had clustered around it in loose bunches, reaching toward the notices or peering at unseen windows only they could see. The glowing tutorial marker settled at Naruto's feet, pulsed once, and vanished. A final window opened. Basic tutorial complete. Naruto stood there for a second, waiting for more.
Nothing came. No voice. No next instruction. No glowing path dragging him around like an idiot.
Just the city around him, loud and vibrant, and the board in front of him covered in work.
He took a step closer. No sooner had his eye fallen on one of the notifications than the ink grew keen. To the right, a little tooltip sprouted, transforming the haphazard scrawl into crisp system text. It was the request of a shopkeeper who required items transported across town. Naruto's eyes wandered before he finished reading. Another notice flickered dimly. Some talk about harvesting herbs.
He skipped that one, as well. A third mentioned a lost ring.
Naruto's expression fell blank. He went on. Then he noticed one in the lower right corner.
A warning about creatures gathering near one of the gates. That one made him halt. The notice illuminated under his gaze, and a quest window opened in front of him, indicating the reward, the location, and a minor difficulty indication. Combat. Low level. Outside town. Naruto's mouth curled before he could stop it. That sounded more like it. He accepted it. The note produced a quiet chime, and the mission nestled itself into his log. The sound was satisfying, clean, like winning a minor argument. Naruto instantly started seeking for more like it. His gaze now raked the board with increased intensity, avoiding any sound that resembled errands. Carrying containers, retrieving misplaced junk, delivering food. No, he wasn't somebody's delivery boy, he didn't have a full dive sword tutorial. He read another monster alert, this one about the beasts of the fields. Accepted. Another spoke of getting plunder from foes on the more difficult trail. Agreed. Then he spotted one with a darker mark across the top of the parchment.
The tooltip is open. More challenging. Greater reward. Fight outside the basic trail.
Naruto had barely comprehended the warning before he tried to accept it. He was halted by a voice. You probably don't want that one. Naruto stopped, the cue still glowing in front of him. The voice was not raised. It was mild enough for the audience, almost, subtle enough to cut through the cacophony without resisting it. No bite in it, no mocking edge, no bossy snap. A serene sweetness that made the warning less a critique, more like somebody quietly grasping his sleeve before he stepped into traffic. Naruto spun around. A girl stood a few feet away from the board, close enough that she must have seen every quest he'd taken, but not so close that she felt like she was crowding him. She too was in novice gear, light leather over a pale underlayer, with a little sword at her side. Should have appeared as cheap as everyone else's armor. Somehow, it didn't on her, maybe because she stood so neatly. Perhaps because her heavy, dark hair brushed her face in gentle, precise patterns. Perhaps because her expression was friendly without being vacuous. Naruto looked a half-second too long. I gazed back at the quest window, as if it held answers. The warning marker still glimmered. This time he saw the recommended level. Higher than himself. His jaw muscles clenched. The girl folded her hands delicately in front of her, her gaze darting once to the cluster of accepted mission icons near his display.
If you want to level up fast, don't stack combat quests early on, she recommended. Naruto's initial response was to be irritated. He could feel that small spark rising immediately, the spark that loathed being corrected by someone he had just met.
But she didn't sound like she thought he was an idiot. That made it difficult to bounce back. She went on before he could decide what expression to wear. Everyone's gonna run right to those monsters near town. It's what happens in games like this. The safest enemies will be swarmed, so you'll be spending more time chasing spawns than gaining experience. And if you go out further to find less crowded enemies, they'll hit harder than the starter armor can take.
Naruto looked down at his chest piece. The cheap leather suddenly felt even poorer.
The girl smiled at him, little and contrite, as if she understood precisely what he was thinking. The boring-looking notices usually matter more at the start. Deliveries teach the town layout. Gathering quests show safe field routes. Training requests unlock or improve basic systems. Sometimes they chain into better rewards after 2 or 3 steps. Naruto looked back at the board. The notices he had ignored didn't look more enticing. But they seemed less pointless, today. One of them had a little indicator he'd not seen before that indicated it was part of a broader request chain. Another had a prize consisting of a basic healing item. Another showed a map expansion notation when he looked at the bottom line. Squinting, he moved his head. The game buried useful goods in chores. That was impolite. The female watched him in silence, not shoving or snatching his menu, nor making a song and dance about being right. This made her appear somehow more believable.
Naruto chose not to take the harder combat mission.
The window disappeared. He grudgingly picked up one of the delivery notes. A little chime sounded. Then there was another. Another bell rang out, a training request for weapon forms and basic skill registration. That one was not so much a humiliation. The girl's smile grew a little brighter. Naruto noticed it out of the corner of his eye and instantly pretended he hadn't seen it.
He still had one combat task. He wasn't completely giving up his dignity.
But he stopped taking every monster note off the board, as if the word, fight, had called him. The market was full of the sounds of voices and footsteps and shop bells and the far-off splash of the plaza fountain. Soft notices flitted in the plastic breeze. The city smelled like bread, hot metal, flowers and dust. Naruto glanced at the quests currently in his log. Half seemed boring, useful likely, same boring. He stared at the girl again. She stayed standing there, speaking gently and in a calm manner, looking as if she had just saved him from wasting his whole first hour without making himself feel like an idiot. It was annoying but also kind of cool. Naruto turned to look at the board, then at the street outside the window. The town of beginnings spread out before him like 1,000 lessons to be learnt. For the first time in the game, it didn't feel like it was something he could brute force his way through. It seemed more like a lesson he had to learn now, and somehow it made it more difficult to look away.
Her grin stayed gentle, but the second Naruto stated he listened, eventually, her face shifted in a way he almost missed. No disrespect. Not mad, just making a decision.
She glanced at him one more second then lifted one hand, moving her fingers through the air with a smoothness that Naruto didn't quite have yet. Before her opened a menu, pale blue and crisp-edged, reflecting slightly in her dark eyes. She didn't fumble for the proper tab, didn't stop to read all the options. Her hand moved once, twice, and ceased.
Naruto heard a bell in his ear. Then a window opened before him.
Invitation to party received. Ice_girl wants to throw a party. Naruto looked. For a second, nothing moved in his face. Then his eyes sharpened at the name. Ice_girl. He looked at the invite. Then on her. Then came the invitation again. The pretty, plain girl stood there with her hands folded again, her long dark hair lying neatly over her shoulders, her upgraded, but still simple gear making her look less like some high-level player and more like somebody who had quietly read the whole instruction manual and then weaponized it, as calm as ever. Her face stayed gentle, but a little spark of laughter suddenly danced in her eyes.
She gave a wink. That's me, she murmured sweetly enough to make the name somehow worse, but you can call me Haku.
Naruto's mouth dropped. At first nothing happened. The market went on around them. Players trotted past with armfuls of quest stuff. A seller announced the day's prices in a cheery loop, and somewhere nearby a guy was shouting because he accidentally bought 6 loaves of bread instead of 1. Naruto was standing in front of a party invite from someone named Ice_Girl and trying to figure out which aspect of it needed attention first. The world was still noisy and brilliant and lively. His finger moved slowly up to the invite. He had not accepted it yet. His eyes returned to her name again. Ice_Girl 5. Then in her face. Haku watched him with absolute patience, but the corner of her mouth quirked as if she understood just what was going on in his thoughts and was enjoying it. Finally Naruto found his voice. That's not what I'm calling you. I told you to call me Haku. I mean the other thing. No, I'm pretending I didn't see it. That might be for the best. The reply was so cool that Naruto's indignation lost its footing before it could really get off the ground. He looked at her for another beat, then made a gruff, dismissive sound beneath his breath and accepted the invitation. The window flickered. Party established. A little display appeared in the corner of his vision. Naruto. Level 3 Ice_Girl, LV. 20. Naruto's eye flickered. The game made the difference look even worse on paper. Haku met his gaze, and thankfully didn't chuckle this time. She moved closer to the job board, her attention drifting from him to the notices, her tone becoming more practical. First, don't think of quests as interesting or boring. That's a delay. Think of them as routes. Naruto folded his arms, looking at the party display with a mild glare, but listening. Haku gestured at the board, not touching it. Her attention passed over a few notices that brightened. Some quests provide a tiny reward all by itself. Those are not always bad. The good ones take you through locations where you can do 2 or 3 other jobs at the same time. The bad ones take you somewhere crowded or dangerous or too far away for the reward to matter. Even Naruto's face was changing, which infuriatingly made sense. Haku went on. His voice was still soothing, but less tentative. Now, below it was confidence, quiet and trained. She didn't sound like she was guessing. She sounded like someone who'd made those mistakes somewhere else, learned from them, and had no interest in making them all over again just to show a point. The delivery quest you did earlier was good because it opened a route to the West Storehouse. The herb quest was good because the same route passes 2 gathering spots and a safe boar field. The slime quest was bad today because too many players started there. The wolf quest was worse because it would have pulled you away from the beginner chain before you had the damage or supplies to make it worth the time. Naruto glanced at his quest log. Now the parts were put differently. Not chores, no errands, a road, a dull journey perhaps, but a path. Haku noticed a note on the board and transmitted the details to the party window. Naruto noticed it pop up as a shared mission option. It appeared innocent. Delivery again. Limited experience. Very little call. But before he could dismiss it, Haku pointed out the reward chain concealed inside the description. Completion unlocks training request. The training request opened the door for a weapons instructor. Depending on the sword category, the instructor may register starting skill routes effectively, affecting how fast specific sword categories improved. Naruto stared at this part. His annoyance became concentrated. Haku looked at him, saw the shift, and grinned a little. There, she said, that's the part you're interested in. Naruto did not respond straight away. Now, he was too occupied reading. Reading really. Later he would feel ashamed of it. Haku chose 2 additional notices. Both dreary looking, both about places close to the first. Then she chose a battle mission, but not from the main gate. It was further away from a side road Naruto hadn't even seen on the map, with a lower crowd warning, and better spawn spacing. Naruto gazed at her from the quest. Haku's smile took on a little more amusement. She said, "Combat is not wrong. You just have to quit hunting the same monsters as everyone else." That hit somewhere deep and personal enough that Naruto glanced aside. Not that it was painful, because that seemed real in a way that was bigger than the game, and he wasn't ready to look into it while standing next to a job board with someone named Ice_Girl. His eye remained on the corner of the party display. Naruto, LV, 3, Ice_Girl, LV, 20. He still loathed to look at it. But suddenly the gap was no longer impassable, but a series of steps between here and there. Haku turned his back to the board and went along the street, not in a hurry. At first he walked half a step behind her, then increased his stride until he was beside her. The extra 3 inches he'd given himself made things simpler than it probably should have been, though he still had to fight the impulse to check if she'd noticed.
She did not look like it. Or she did and didn't have the guts to tell it. Ahead of them was the market, open, warm stone, fluttering awnings, glittering signs, the bustle of players, the fragrance of bread hanging in the air, like if the town was trying to entice him into staying distracted. Haku navigated it as if she knew where every curve would go. Naruto moved as if attempting to memorize everything at once and pretend he was not impressed. At every few steps something fresh announced itself to his vision. Repair kit, West Market Lane, NPC, Supply Clerk. Player. Level 1, Player. LVL. 4, then beside him at Ice_Girl, Level 20. Naruto's jaw clenched again. Haku caught his eyes flick to the display. This time she said nothing at all. She sent him another shared marker, a dim shimmering path on his map, and tilted her head toward the street ahead. Come on, she said. Better go before the others find out this is a route if you want to catch up. Naruto looked at the bright trail. The tutorial had been a beginner's guide, but this time it felt different. It wasn't the game telling him what to do, it was someone who knew the game telling him there was a better way through. Naruto unfastened the strap of his starter gear, worked his shoulders and stepped in front of her. For the first time since he'd logged on, he wasn't just reacting to how genuine the world felt, he was starting to play. Haku didn't wait for Naruto to complete fixing his gear. She took the first step. Not so swiftly as to seem rushed, but with the calm surety of one who already recognized the value of time. The path marker she'd shown him pulsed dimly down the street ahead, weaving through the market bustle and around a corner that Naruto hadn't even noticed before. Players blocked the bigger route near the main gate, most of them still loud with first-day excitement, but Haku angled away from them into a narrower lane between two shopfronts. Naruto followed, gazing at the path on his map, then peering up at the street, then back at the map again. They were beneficial, but they also made the world feel congested in a new way. When he looked at signs, they labeled themselves. NPC names blinked in, then out. The player levels fluttered at the corner of his eye. The city felt and smelled authentic enough, yet game info kept gliding over it like thin glass. Haku slid between two players who were squabbling over a mission reward, then looked back once to see that she was still behind her. Naruto was. Just. A few of gamers were crossing his route with crates from some delivery quest, and Naruto had to stop short to prevent walking right into them. His shoulder knocked against one of the containers, hardwood scraping across his beginning armor. The player who had it shot him an irritated look and hurried on. Naruto got past them, but Haku had already come to the mouth of the side lane. She looked back again, then seemed to understand that he was about to get swallowed by the market traffic a second time. So she returned. Haku touched his palm, and Naruto looked up, having just passed a lady selling fruit. His whole body went rigid. Not markedly, not with a whoop, just sudden full-body rigidity, like every nerve in him had been gripped by the collar. Her fingers curled about his hand, lightly, not tugging hard, not holding, just enough contact to lead him through the crowd. And he could feel it. That was the trouble. Her hand was warm, not warm, no exaggeration, just ordinary human warmth, palm against palm, fingers curling around his with delicate pressure. The leather of her glove felt velvety along the back of his hand, but her fingertips were bare, and where they touched his skin, the sensation was clean and quick, real enough that his brain forgot, for one dumb second, that she was an avatar in a video game. Looking at their connected hands, Naruto, he looked blank. Then red. Then perplexed. Then a bit apprehensive. Haku gave a little tug and he moved because his feet recalled how before the rest of him did. She led him into the alley, away from the thickest portion of the crowd, and only when they were clear did she look back properly. She looked at his face, and her face changed. Not self-satisfied, no teasing right away. And then understanding. You felt that, she said. Naruto drew his hand back as if it were a hot pan, but she hadn't done anything wrong. He looked at his fingers last, flexed them once. They had betrayed him. Yeah, he answered, his voice more gruff than he wanted it. I felt that one. Haku dropped her hand to her side. Her stance was still soft, but there was a quiet seriousness now, the same kind that had come over her when she mentioned the job board. She didn't laugh at him for jumping. She didn't lecture him for being childish. If anything, she appeared to remember the emotion herself. That's what makes the nerve gear so amazing, she replied quietly, and scary, at first. It doesn't just show you stuff. It makes your brain believe that the world is happening to you. Naruto gazed beyond her to the bazaar.
A man at the stall gave the gamer a paper-wrapped skewer. Steam was rising from it. The baking smell still wafted down the street somewhere behind them. The breeze pushed between buildings, cool on the sweat at the back of Naruto's neck. His toe still remembered the stone he had earlier kicked. The sign of the shop was still on his forehead.
It had been doing this since the start of the game.
But it was a different hand. The bread was odd. Stone was strange. The wind was odd. Somebody was worse. Haku saw the dawning of it on his face, and continued, her voice low enough it was largely his, not the street surrounding them. Touch, temperature, pressure, balance, pain within the safety limits, even things like texture and weight. The system feeds it all back. It is not perfect, but it is close enough that your mind eventually stops arguing with it. That is why people wanted this so badly. Not because it is a better screen. Because it lets a place feel like a place.
Naruto swallowed and looked down at his hand again.
The warmth was gone now, yet the memory of it lingered. But the interaction itself irritated him more. He made a fist, then gently opened his hand. His fingers moved a little. Air stirred between them. He flexed. The glove seemed chafed at the wrist. So it all seems true, he remarked. Haku gave a nod. Most things, yes. The system filters out dangerous levels of pain, but the aim is immersion. You touch stone, it feels like stone. You eat bread, it tastes like bread. Someone grabs your hand. Not that she was embarrassed, exactly, but the example had become a little too precise after the fact and she stopped there.
Naruto watched it. He had the perfect chance, for one rare moment, to let the calm sit there. The narrow lane was quieter than the market, darkened by overhanging signs and canvas awnings. The noise of the crowd faded behind them, and Haku was close enough to see the slight reflection of the light in her eyes, her look open and kind and maybe just a touch hesitant now that she had explained herself. It nearly went brittle. Close. Then Naruto's face changed suddenly, with terror.
Hold on. Haku blinked. Now Naruto appeared very concerned. Not by her hand, or the reality of the nerve gear. But by a completely new notion that evidently kicked down the door of his brain. If this thing makes everything look real, his eyes furrowed with intense mistrust. Does it tell you when you have to pee?
Haku looked at him. The calm, almost romantic quiet disappeared immediately.
Naruto continued on since he was already set on the worst conceivable course.
No, seriously. 'Cause I'm in my body but I'm not in my body, right? So what if I'm out fighting some wolf or whatever, and my real body's just sitting there like... He cut himself off, contorting his face as if he knew the sentence was about to go awful. Is there a menu item? A bathroom warning? A bladder bar? Does the game tell you?
Haku opened his mouth slightly. For a second it looked as if she was deciding whether to answer, laugh or walk away and take the party invitation back. Naruto waved at his own status panel, as if this was a system's concern of such consequence. There's a stamina bar. There's hunger. Bread has a comfort boost. You can't tell me nobody requested this.
Haku moved her head aside. Her shoulders shifted once.
Naruto's eyes widened. You're laughing again, he said.
She put a palm to her mouth, but it didn't do anything. Her laughter was low and restrained, and yet poignantly sweet. That sort of chuckle, the sort that made Naruto's ears flush even though he felt totally justified. I'm sorry, she said. You are not. I try to be.
That's worse. Haku dropped her hand, amusement still in her eyes. The bashful softness from before hadn't fully disappeared, but Naruto had certainly tripped over it, knocked it into a market stall and replaced it with restroom mechanics. She drew a breath and collected herself with laudable effort. There are real-world safety notices, she remarked. The system keeps an eye on the body. If there's an issue, it can give you a warning or force a logout, depending on the severity. For normal needs, players are expected to be responsible for themselves.
Naruto looked at her. So there's no bladder bar.
Not. That sounds like bad design. It's not a bad design. Bad design. If bread gets a tooltip, my body should get a warning before it betrays me.
Again Haku squeezed her lips together, struggling to suppress a laugh.
Naruto had turned humiliation into argument and felt more confident. He crossed his arms. I'm just saying, if I were to invent the full dive nerd helmet, I'd put that in. Nerve gear, Haku gently corrected. Nerd helmet.
She smiled. The grin was sweet and little and helpless.
You are very strange, she said. Naruto turned away but the grin came back, against his will. Yeah, well, you called yourself Ice_Girl.
That was not the wisest choice I made. That was criminal.
I was younger, probably this morning. Haku's eyes narrowed a bit, but he kept smiling. Do you want help to catch up or not? Naruto's grin was replaced by something more serious, but the crimson at the tips of his ears hadn't entirely disappeared. He peered beyond her to the way marker farther down the lane. The luminous line moved toward a quieter gate, away from the throng, and toward whatever efficient route Haku had in mind. The game still seemed difficult. Too real in ways that prickled his skin. Too convenient, in ways that reminded him of its fakeness. Too large in every dimension. And now here was Haku, level 20, sweet-voiced, lovely in a plain way somehow worse than showy, offering to guide him through everything while obviously willing to overlook the fact that his first profound query regarding full-dive sensory immersion had involved restroom warnings. Naruto rolled his shoulders, placing the beginning armor more comfortably on himself. Yeah, he responded, coming forward. Help I need. Haku bowed, happy but not overjoyed, and walked down the lane. This time she did not grasp his hand. Naruto saw it. And he acted like he didn't. Haku didn't begin by taking him out. The first thing that Naruto noticed was that the shortcut gate, the safe field path, some hidden monster spot where the game did its secret experience dumping to anyone smart enough to know where to stand. He expected movement, enemies, battling, proof that level 20 was born out of doing something thrilling while everyone else spent time. Instead, Haku turned him back toward the village. Not the main square, not the job board full with people. A side street behind the market, where the buildings pressed in tighter, and the cacophony subsided to something gentler. Laundry was strung from the paper windows. Wood signs rattled in the wind. By the roadside a narrow canal caught the false sunlight in rippling strips. NPCs walked the lane, baskets in hand, sweeping steps, stacking crates, chatting with one another in tiny loops that Naruto would have overlooked entirely if not for Haku stopping. She stood at the mouth of the street and let him stare. Naruto looked. He spied a sleepy back road. Haku saw the game. This is a route, she remarked. Her eyes flicked to Naruto, then back to the street. No quest marker to shine. Nothing. No evident payoff. Just a woman putting jars on a stall, a youngster NPC chasing a dog by the canal, an older man arguing with a delivery worker by a cart and a guard lying against the wall with his arms folded. Naruto crossed his own arms, already doubtful yet listening. Haku gestured softly, not at anything in particular, but down the street generally. Most new players think leveling is about finding monsters and killing them until the number changes. That works later. Early on it is inefficient because everyone is doing it, and because they don't understand what the town is giving them. Naruto's eyes again flitted across the NPCs. Above the head of the woman with jars was an icon, faintly. Not very smart, the less evident sort. It only appeared when he concentrated. The older man had one too, hidden until his quarrel with the cart worker reached a certain point. At first the guard had no marker, but then a player close came past with a folded notice and the guard's position changed a little and a pale question mark flickered on for half a second and then went out. Naruto blinked. He would have missed it all. Haku looked at his face, and appeared pleased when she noticed him look. Jobs are the natural stratum, she remarked. The board gives tasks anyone can take. They're easy to find, but because of that they are crowded. Routes are the second layer. You take jobs that overlap in location, timing, or NPCs. Dialogue missions are the third layer. They do not always appear unless you talk to people, carry certain items, finish certain errands, or return at the right point in a chain. Naruto's eyes narrowed in concentration. He didn't look exactly excited. His look was one of challenge. Haku went to the jar woman first. Naruto trailed half a stride behind, watching her approach. It wasn't a search for her instantly. She said hi to the NPC, sat through the first line of speech, then picked the second response choice, not the first one. A little discussion window appeared in Naruto's party view. The first option was the straightforward and courteous. Sure, I can help with those. The second choice was more particular. This for the pharmacy off West Market. Haku took the second. The woman's demeanor changed, rather subtly surprisingly. Her smile softened. The conversation shifted. There's a new request. Not merely delivery. An affiliated errand to the apothecary. Bonus familiarity for medical products and a discount on low-level healing supplies when completed. Naruto looked over the text of the award. Hidden. Haku gave a nod. Hidden. Soft. The game rewards paying attention. You collected medicinal herbs earlier, so the apothecary route is already partially open to you. If you had only taken the basic delivery response, you would have gotten money and a mall experience. With the specific response, you get a relationship flag.
Naruto looked really offended. What, relationship flag?
You mean the jar lady? Link to her merchant network. Naruto looked at the NPC, then at Haku, then back at the NPC. The jar woman smiled sweetly, not knowing she had been reduced to a relationship flag.
Haku went on before he could say anything that might throw the lesson off course.
NPC relationships aren't about romance. They're about reputation, trust, familiarity, access. Help a baker once and they may sell you bread. Help them 3 times and choose dialogue that shows you remember their problem and they may tell you about a delivery route. That route may introduce you to a guard. The guard may unlock a safer gate path. The safer gate path may lead to better gathering nodes and fewer crowded monsters. Naruto peered down the street again. His mind went quiet on the back road. Not visually, but tactically. The woman with jars was related to apothecary. The apothecary is about curing stuff. Healing things are based on remaining out longer. The delivery route is based on the guard. The guard linked up with a gate. The gate was linked to monsters no one else was farming yet. This was not a mere quest. Thread. No, not a thread, not even. It was a net. Naruto despised how much he appreciated it. The jar woman asked, and Haku consented and shared with him. The task appeared in his log with a slightly different name than the jobs on the board. Apothecary stock, assist local vendor. It was an interesting. It also has 3 secret reward spots. Naruto's jaw moved.
Haku caught the look and almost smiled, but kept his concentration.
She led him away from the stall, toward the older man at the cart. Now, try farmin', she urged. Farming at low levels is not just killing. You get experience from completing, discovering, using the system for the first time, registering skills, mapping, gathering, and chain bonuses. If you combine them correctly, you level faster than someone who only fights. The cart man was bitching about a busted wheel. Naruto thought Haku would take on yet another repair task. But she asked the delivery person where the broken merchandise was going. Then the talk changed. The first task was to correct the still. A better way would have been to take the intact supplies to the west storeroom and report the wheel damage to a guard so the route could be temporarily diverted. Naruto could see 3 objectives in one quest chain. His eyes opened by themselves. Haku picked and shared it. 3 goals, she said. 1 street, 2 NPC interactions. 1 map path, overlaps with supplier quest.
Naruto stared at her as if she had snatched a knife out of thin air.
You're telling me I rushed around like an idiot earlier because I was doing one thing at a time. Haku's countenance softened, but she did not refute it.
Naruto sighed silently, rubbing a hand down his face. She gave him the moment. Then she turned and began to walk.
The following bit was less like a lesson and more like watching how the town breathed. Haku guided him through the debate, never forcing him, letting him pick the wrong choice so he could experience the difference. When Naruto chose the blunt choice with a shop assistant, the NPC delivered a basic response and no follow-up. Haku reset the engagement with her own turn, choosing the option concerning the assistant's earlier complaint about late supplies, and the conversation opened up into a little discount and a request to check on a courier.
Naruto looked at the new target. The game remembers what the NPC had stated. Or as it did. Either way, it was something. They took the jars to the apothecary. Naruto saw that fragile products had specific handling conditions, even though inventory could easily handle conventional commodities. If he moved too violently, the quest warning pulsed. If he moved slower by the stairs, the alarm would stop. He disliked being careful, but the added incentive kept glowing in the corner of his eyes like a dare, so he forced himself to move properly.
Haku did not miss the chat at the pharmacist. She asked about the quality of the herb. She spoke the woman's name. She let the NPC drone on until he revealed that the herbs in the western field were less helpful after too many players gathered the obvious nodes. Then the apothecary pointed out 2 quieter meeting places on their maps. Naruto glanced at the new marks. His last herb hunt had taken him to the packed field.
This carried him past it, still safe, still low level, slower.
Now he saw the pattern. And that saw transformed his posture. This time, he was standing taller, not to look taller, but because the game wasn't a blur of menus and feelings anymore. It was still overwhelming, still too real, insane in every aspect. But now he could see handles on it. Ways of holding it, ways of obtaining. Haku saw it. She modified the lesson. The trail ultimately hit fighting outside the quieter west gate. Not much, at first. They harvested herbs from a hillside behind a modest stone wall, and underneath them, in the field, roamed low-level boars. Haku explained him how spawn routes worked, how monsters moved in loose patterns instead of standing motionless, how striking one near a turn in its route may avoid him from accidentally dragging another. She mapped out a safe loop on his map: gather 2 herb nodes, shoot 1 boar if it came too close to the wall, inspect the fallen supply crate by the fence, back to the road before the heavier mobs came too close.
Naruto took the loop once with her watching. It was slow feeling.
Herb progress, supply salvage, boar material, map discovery, weapon skill familiarity, local supplier chain update, tiny relationship increase with the apothecary network, minor combat experience, 1 safe path recorded. The completions then added up. The experience bar has changed more than he thought. Naruto saw the boar fragments vanish from the grass and accessed his status screen. The number had increased, not a level yet, but nearly. He looked at Haku. She stood, a few steps away, by the stone wall, serene in the breeze, black hair stirring lightly on her cheek. She didn't look smug, she didn't look impatient, she looked like someone who had just opened a door for him and was waiting to see if he could open the next door by himself. Naruto stared at the path, then the markers, then the quest log. For once he didn't say anything and he went through the circle again.
This time was more clean. He slowed down the herb contact and earned the clean gather benefit. He waited for the boar to turn and engage, got the first hit, followed with the basic sword skill, then backed off as the next spawn path got too close. He checked the crate after the fight, not before, because the first run had taught him that the timing worked out better that way. He returned to the path with all objectives updated and no wasted healing items. Haku's smile was faint, but clear. Naruto saw and feigned not to be affected by the compliment. It did. They repeated the route until the pattern was ingrained in his muscles. Not dull repetition but rhythm. Town talk, delivery, pickup, safe combat, return, hand in, unlock next connection, route adjustment. Every NPC felt more like a potential entryway than background decoration. Every boring errand felt suspect. Each reward line was worth reading. Not all of them were worth it, Haku stated. Some quests were traps in a softer sense. Too much time, bad distance, crowded objective, poor chain. The trick was not accepting everything. The challenge was seeing what connected. By the time they returned to the town of beginnings, Naruto's inventory had herbs, boar hide, a small stack of coins, 2 basic healing items, and a voucher from the apothecary that halved his next purchase cost. His map had more streets filled up than previously. His mission log displayed completed chains instead of dispersed activities. Near the west entrance an NPC guard called out Haku's name and Naruto by association of party, which made Naruto pause mid-step, the game having seen him through her reputation. That was relationship mechanics, not friendship, per se. Not true trust, but something close enough to be useful. Haku gazed at him. Now you see it. Naruto looked down the street, past the busy job board where players were still congregated around the obvious notices. Then he stared at the calmer lanes they had chosen to make a whole route out of errands he would ordinarily overlook. He saw it. That was the problem. The game was not only about swinging a sword hard enough. It was about understanding where to strike, when to stop, who to talk to, what to carry, what to ignore, what to remember, and how to make one action count 3 times instead of just once. Naruto's face stiffened with concentration, his blue eyes sparkling brightly under the artificial afternoon light. Haku sent him another shared note, a route summary, not a complete guide or every secret, just the bits they had done together, written clearly enough for him to reproduce on his own. Naruto glanced at it for a long period before adding it to his notes. The little chime sounded softer than a level up but seemed almost as striking. Haku folded her hands again, eyeing him with her customary quiet, patient expression that had somehow grown more scary than any tutorial command. She claimed efficient leveling was not about speed. It's about using less waste. Naruto looked at the note. On the way, higher than it should have been. After errands, weeds, a boar loop, talking to false people who somehow mattered. At his own experience bar. And then he smiled, slow, keen, genuine, not because he had caught up. He hadn't, not even close, but now he understood there was a way. And Naruto had always been better after someone showed him where the wall was. He tightened the strap of his cheap starter armor, stared toward the west gate, and for the first time since meeting Haku, his frustration changed totally into hunger. Not for bread, for the ascent. Now Naruto wanted to do another way, but Haku would not let him. Not, at least, the way he meant it. He gestured at the board with the assurance of someone who'd just learned that tasks could be stacked, prizes could be chained, and that dull errands were better than fighting the same slime as 20 other morons. The answer, in his mind, was easy. Get another pile of work, run through it, turn it all in, see the experience bar jump again.
Haku studied him for a silent second, then turned and headed for the apothecary instead of the employment board.
Naruto's hand was still up in the air. The board's that way. I know. You were walking away from it. Yup. He lowered his hand slowly, watching her with a scowl. They entered into the shop and the bell tinkled. The pungent green fragrance of herbs closed in once more. Haku floated to the counter with the same quiet precision she'd shown everywhere else, waited for the old NPC to finish fiddling with bottles before choosing the dialogue option referring to the recovered bandage bundle. Naruto stood next to her, arms crossed, watching the discussion window shift. There was a fresh demand. Not from the board. From the NPC. He glanced at it. Haku looked at him. That's why it matters what quest to do when. Naruto bent closer to the window. Reading. Now the pharmacist had a message for a field doctor somewhere near the Western Training Road. It was a little reward, but the path led by 2 meeting places, a weapon form trainer, and the ancient cart trail they had just unlocked. Naruto's eyes squinted. It's a different stack. Yes, but we only got it because we finished the courier job before taking the public notice off the board.
He gazed at her. So if I took the board quest first?
You'd still get experience, Haku replied, accepting the NPC request and passing it along to him. But you would miss the relationship increase and the cheaper healing items in this follow-up. The order matters. Naruto winced. Not that he didn't get it. Because he did. Rewarding patience, which was quite offensive. They departed the shop with the new request enabled. Haku sent him the overlay of the route, and Naruto watched as many markings blinked into existence. One was at the field doctor. One sat beside a patch of plants at the side of the road. Another hovered over a training yard just beyond the western gate. The old cart trail shimmered softly, no longer hidden now that they had charted it. This time he walked beside her, not behind. His basic armor was still inexpensive, and still squeaked as he went. The blade at his side rubbed softly against his hip. The city felt different today. Overwhelming still, genuine still, his flesh saw things before his brain, but there were lines in the chaos. Directions, trigger, timers, 2 NPCs that mattered if you talked to them the proper manner and recalled what they said.
Naruto peered at Haku out of the corner of his eye.
She seemed peaceful, too cool, like level 20 was the usual. Like all this was normal to know. Like she hadn't just damaged his understanding of how this game was played.
How long did you play the beta for? He inquired.
Haku did not respond immediately. They passed a merchant's stall where a woman was laying out jars of honey. As Naruto's eyes scanned the item names they flickered and he made himself not get distracted. Haku dodged a player haggling with an NPC about prices, and stared along the western street before him. Not all the time, she said. Naruto looked at her. That's not an answer. It's an answer. It's a cop-out. Her mouth wavered a little but she kept walking. A couple weeks. Naruto almost stopped dead. A couple of weeks.
The beta time was restricted. A little is not a few weeks. It's like people that have played MMOs for years.
Naruto gazed forward, then turned back to her, trying to fit that sentence into something he knew. A few weeks in this realm, studying routes, missions, NPC speech, hidden rewards, spawn timings, whatever else was packed beneath that wonderful voice like a weapon. He shook his head. So you knew all this before today? Some, Haku said. Not everything was brought over exactly. Developers updated quest time, adjusted monster placement and changed some paths. Some NPC interactions start differently now, but the structure is identical. As they went, Naruto digested that. We were facing the western gate. The main road was still teeming with new players, but Haku steered down the side way they'd opened earlier. There the guard reviewed them and offered a slightly altered greeting, one that used the courier's name. This time Naruto noticed it. A flag for the partnership. With the guard.
By virtue of the preceding route, because Haku had selected the dialogue option with his name.
Naruto narrowed his eyes in grudging appreciation. So the beta didn't just show you where stuff was, he continued.
It told you how the game is played. Haku looked at him and this time her smile was not one of amusement or shyness. It was happy. Yes, that's a nice way to put it. Naruto looked aside hastily, claiming that he didn't care about the praise. It did. The path beyond the gate dipped down into the high grass. The artificial sunlight warmed the back of Naruto's neck while the wind flowed around the field in broad waves. He could hear players shouting in the vicinity of the main boar area, but the old cart lane was calm. Their trail marker curled away from the noise and not into it. Haku halted as they neared the first area of herbs. Before she could say anything, Naruto crouched down. This time he waited for the tags. Smilax, bitterleaf medicinal plant, field mint. He picked the proper plants carefully, taking only what the task asked. Haku worked, watching the road, and said without glancing at him. Most players spend time because they treat every aim as independent. They take a task, finish it, go back, accept another, complete it, go back. That feels productive, but half their time is travel. Naruto plucked out the final herb and stood up. So you count the travel as well?
Exactly. When you're walking somewhere, ask yourself what else can be done on the way. Gathering, mapping, dialogue, enemy materials, delivery items, training progress. Even if each reward is small, they add up.
Naruto opened his mission book. The item was updated under one demand. Moved a little, a familiar gathering bar. The field medic delivery was still on. The training road marking was coming up. 3 items already, no fighting yet. It was so satisfying, it angered him. They headed for the field medic. A low-level boar wandered close to the road on the way. Naruto's hand moved towards his blade of its own accord, but Haku raised 2 fingers in a subtle signal. He paused. The boar snorted and crossed to the other side of the path, then turned to the grass beside a rock.
Haku pointed out a faint path behind it. That one's not worth chasing yet.
Naruto grimaced. Right over there. It's also taking us off our path. If you follow it, we'll lose time and someone else might get the respawn near the medic camp before we get there.
He looked at the boar. It was just asking for a hit.
That made leaving things alone harder. Haku caught the look in his eyes and pushed forward, gently but firmly. Farming isn't destroying everything you see. It is picking what has the most yield for the least waste. Naruto's mouth worked. Then he withdrew his hand from the sword.
They went past the boar. It felt like losing a fight with himself.
He knew in 10 minutes. The field medic camp was set up by a damaged length of fence along the road. There were 2 NPCs, one was binding up an injured guard, the other was sorting goods from a half-opened crate. The medic took the apothecary's message, but a new dialogue option came up, since Naruto picked the right plants on the way.
He touched it cautiously. The medic also took the herbs.
Additional prize. The injured guard then said that little monsters had been bothering the fence line. A field material request was opened, tied to the same location and with a low spawn count, with a timed bonus if completed before returning to town. Naruto looked to Haku. She nodded once. Now he unsheathed the blade. The system obeyed the notion seamlessly, placing the basic longsword in his palm without the clunky manual effort his real body would have required. That still felt odd, but less odd than before. He went through the shattered fence and looked at the grass. A little animal scuttled over the ditch. He concentrated and the name came to him. Field Slime, LV. 2. No peeps. No contest. No 12 players for the same blob.
Just one enemy in the right place at the right moment.
Naruto moved. The fight was cleaner but shorter than before. He slashed once and backed off, the slime lunging forward, then used Rage Spike once the skill trigger had settled. The impact caused the slime to burst into light, the substance dropping into his inventory. Real field material has been processed. We have also requested the medic camp to update. He'd used a registered sword skill, Propian, on the journey so training progress increased. Naruto looked at the notifications, and then stared slowly at Haku. She didn't say a word. She needn't have. His face was that harsh, hungry grin again.
All right, he said, breathing a bit faster from the fight. That was a good one.
Haku's eyes grew heated. Clever, she said. One and the same. Not always. It is to me. They went around the fence loop twice. Not blindly. Haku made him wait for the appropriate spawn, ignore the wrong one, grab one item near the ditch, and then only return to the medic when 3 goals were ready to be turned in simultaneously. Every little choice seemed irritatingly restricted then, yet obviously useful later. When they reached the western road again,
Naruto's quest log was like gears on top of gears. The apothecary delivery was packed to the brim. Medic support complete. Field material request fulfilled. Familiarity collecting grew. Progress of training updated. Familiarity with old card paths decreased. His experience bar ticked up again. Naruto watched it climb, not enough for another enormous leap but enough to make the system feel responsive, enough to prove the method worked. He looked at Haku and they headed back into town. So 20 levels, he murmured, slowly now. Did you do this all day? Yes, in the beta. Did a stronger version today. Early hours matter, early advantages compound. Naruto looked a little uneasy. Compound. Better items early means I can stay outside longer. Longer outside means more routes completed. More routes equals more reputation, better unlocks. Better unlocks gives me better quests before the other players get to them. More experience, more call, more information. Naruto listened, gaze focused, the wind tugging at his tousled blonde hair. Now he wasn't bored. Something in him had been struck by the explanation. You weren't just leveling, he remarked. You were pushing past the lead pack. Yes, and the further you got out in front, the easier it was to stay out in front. Usually, Naruto sighed quietly through his nose. He despised it, he liked it, it felt unjust, the sort of injustice which all decent institutions seem to contain until you know them. The sun heated the town as they approached at the gate, the stone walls glowing gold. The guard welcomed them again, this time mentioning the field medic report. Another little reputation alert had popped up and Naruto had obviously spotted it but Haku could tell he hadn't. They handed in the route bit by little and the rewards flowed in with that now familiar string of quiet chimes. Naruto looks around, not only the experience, the bond deepens. Knowledge about the path, the cost, map detail, the following conversation that arised because they did things in the appropriate order. When the last window had gone out, Naruto was standing more silently than before. Not tired, but lost in contemplation. This was new, even to make, and he felt dubious of himself. Haku stood nearby with folded hands, waiting patiently. Naruto stared at the crowded job board across the street where players still loitered, snatching up notices, discussing combat assignments, and intending to storm the same gates he had earlier. Then he took a glance at the side streets, hidden ways, NPCs, and secret work underneath the surface. So, he began, eyes gleaming again, how many of these routes do you know? Haku smiled, almost apologetically. Some. Naruto glanced at her. A few like you did beta, a little. But her grin was nice. Naruto pointed at her again, but this time with more eagerness than accusation. You're the sweetest, most suspicious person I know. Haku gave a lovely, loving laugh. Naruto grinned, though he didn't want to, then turned his eyes back to the street with a thirst, not just to wield a sword, or level up, but to genuinely grasp the whole scenario. They did another turn in at the West Market as the false afternoon light died over the rooftops. Naruto was starting to get the hang of the rhythm now, which irritated him as it meant Haku had been right. At first, she described the rod as unimpressive. A message here, a herb patch there, a carefully picked monster spawn, a guard report, a delivery item that only mattered because they'd spoken to the right NPC beforehand. Each item was little enough, for itself, to be ignored. Together they moved up his experience bar. The last completion chimed and the prize window unfurled before him. Background. C minor. West Road familiarity. A small friendship boost with the F. One medic, one healing item for novices. Not big in itself, but the bar below his level took a little forward step again. Naruto crossed his arms and gazed, still 3 level. But well. A lot closer. Haku stood by him at the edge of the street, sorting prizes with small menu motions. Once her fingers moved. A window closed. Her eyes changed. And another opened. A few things were shifted. Then her menus disappeared. Naruto squinted. She made it all seem so easy. The thought haunted him as they made their way down the street again. The town of beginnings folded over them in pleasant layers. Store bells and player talk, cartwheels on stone, NPCs calling out hellos that Naruto was starting to recognize as more than background noise. As they passed, a baker waved to them. Haku glanced over and grinned at the apothecary's assistant. The guard at the west gate raised 2 fingers in recognition. All those small reactions were behind her. Not in words, not that she was a celebrity. But the game knew her. Naruto saw this happen, and looked down at the sword on his hip. There'd been a question in the back of his head for long, pushed away by routes, choices, hidden mission chains, the perpetual humiliation of understanding that errands had strategy. It came back. Now they were slowing down. So what about the bosses? Haku's hand froze midway through shutting a menu. For a split second, Naruto saw. Haku resumed the action, shutting the window. He said, "Bosses. The floor bosses," stated Naruto. Now he was walking beside her, not behind her, his starting boots lightly scuffing against stone. "That's what I knew before logging in. 100 floors, right, each floor has a boss at the end. Beat the boss, go up. That's how you clear the game." Haku turned his gaze to the path ahead. "Yes," she said, "that is the broad strokes." Naruto longed for more. Nothing at all. The roadway opened up into a smaller area where 3 NPC children ran around a fountain chasing each other. The water splashed softly, catching the sunlight in dazzling tiny shards. Haku slowed to allow them pass, though Naruto was quite sure the game would just relocate them past players if necessary. She looked at the NPCs for half a second longer than she had to. Naruto continued to watch her. "You fought one in beta?" "No." The answer was simple and true. That astonished him somewhat. Haku put her hands together in front of her, and kept her eyes on the fountain. The beta didn't open that kind of combat to everyone. There was some information, rumors, party and data, enemy patterns from previous dungeon tests. "But I never fought a floor boss." Naruto took that in. It somehow made the bosses feel bigger. Haku knew the routes, NPCs, spawn paths, hidden chains, dialogue triggers, and all the weird little things Naruto had spent the last several hours understanding were there. She had gone from level 5 to level 20 while he was still being bullied by herbs. She navigated this environment like a person reading the grain of wood under paint. And even she had never fought a floor boss. Naruto looked up. The sky still seemed open up above the buildings, but he knew better now. This level had an end somewhere beyond the city and the fields, past all the beginner's trails and all the safe routes. A dungeon, a boss chamber, something engineered not to instruct but to prevent people. His fingers twitched once at his sword. Haku had seen that too. Her voice dropped lower. "You don't need to worry about floor bosses just yet." Naruto was silent for over 3 minutes. That seemed fishy, he thought. Haku saw before he said. She noticed, for his eyes stopped dancing about the street and began to stick to the sword at his hip. The sword bumped against his leg as they walked and he glanced at the western gate, then toward a pair of players practicing basic slashes near the side of the road. The whole time his brow was wrinkled. Haku slowed down a bit. "You got a question?" Naruto stared at her, then back again at the sword. "Yeah." He rubbed the side of his neck and kept walking beside her. "How does fighting work, actually?" Haku's expression became one of patient attention. Naruto waved a hand vaguely, attempting to figure out what it was he meant. "I know I can swing. I know the game helps. I'm not stupid enough to think I suddenly know sword stuff for real. But when I hit that slime, it wasn't just me swinging either. The sword moved right, the damage number popped up, and then that glowing stab thing pulled me forward." "Rage spike," Haku replied. "Yeah, that." Naruto tapped the hilt of his basic longsword twice with his fingers. "Is combat really about being proficient with a sword, or is it about getting the game to make movements for you?" Haku seemed thrilled with the question. Not too haughty, pleased, not s. He'd finally asked the question that mattered. "Both," she said. Naruto scowled. "That's annoying." "It's accurate." They reached the limit of the western road, where the town melted into stone walls and wagon ruts and broad swaths of grass beyond the gate. Haku halted in a peaceful place, off the road and out of the main player traffic. There were a few low-level creatures wandering in the field beyond, but none close enough to aggro. She thought about her gun. The blade came softly into her hand, clean and seamless, the motion so natural it hardly seemed like a draw at all. Naruto watched, his eyes fixed. Haku kept the sword low at her side. Basic movement is assisted. Drawing, sheathing, holding, gripping, not cutting your own leg open by mistake. The system allows players to function. That's why a complete beginner can pick up a sword and use it. Naruto nodded slowly. That was how he had felt. "But that doesn't make you strong," Haku went on. "A standard swing is feeble. It will work against really weak adversaries, but the major damage is done with the sword skills." She moved her feet. Not really, only a little shift of position. Her blade slid back, Aimed just so, her body dropping in behind it with clean, trained economy. The blade started to glow. Naruto's eyes grew sharper. This is the pre-motion, said Haku. Every sword skill has one. The system registers the stance, angle and intent. When the move is accepted, the weapon illuminates. The light around her blade brightened. Then she shifted. Quickly, the machine yanked her through a fast-cutting strike, sharper, cleaner than a typical human movement. It wasn't mad. There was no flash for flash's sake. The blade drew a dazzling line in the air and halted with perfect control. Then Haku stopped for a fraction of a second. It was caught by Naruto. At the end of the movement her body froze, if only for a moment, as if the game was holding her in place until it let her move again. And she relaxed, lowering the sword. That's the trade-off, she replied. Sword skills are more powerful than normal attacks, and the system helps players execute them at speeds they usually can't do on their own, but there's an end lag after the skill is used. Naruto looked to the place she had stopped. So if you miss, you may be punished. His mouth turned. Bad. Very terrible. Haku turned back to the field where a pig was wandering near a tuft of grass. That is why combat is not only about using the strongest move. You need timing, enemy patterns, distance, stamina, cooldowns. If you use a skill at the wrong time, the enemy may move, block, or hit you during the delay. Naruto's hand went to his sword, but didn't draw it. So regular hits to get things started. A lot. Positioning, interrupting, testing range, finishing weak enemies. But depending only on normal swings is inefficient. Against stronger monsters, you need sword skills to do proper damage. Haku paused and added, many beginners panic and just wave their swords around. It feels like fighting, but the damage is poor. Naruto seemed instantly indignant on behalf of people he had never met. Then he recalled the crowded field of slime. People have been doing that a lot. He turned his head. Okay, yeah, I saw that. Haku's voice was still soft. Sword skills also have damage types. Slash, thrust, pierce, blunt. Different weapons and skills behave differently. A rapier user fights differently than a one-handed sword user. Axes, spears, daggers, curved swords, two-handed weapons, they all have their own skills and rhythms. Naruto looked down again at his basic longsword. Okay, how about this? One-handed sword, until the system changes your selected route to something else later on. Naruto squinted his gaze slightly. Later, weapon skills grow the more you use them. The more skill proficiency you have, the more sword skills you can unlock. Better equipment changes damage, speed, accuracy, and durability. Enhancement matters too, but not all weapon stats are visible unless the item is appraised. Naruto shot her a glare. So even the sword may fool me. It doesn't lie, it leaves out detail. That's lying with a few more steps. Haku's mouth quirked a little, but she continued. There are groups too. That impacts battle more than most newbies understand. SAO doesn't employ hard classes like many MMOs. You don't just stand there as tank or damage in the same way, especially early on. But fighting in a party allows players to use switching. Naruto cocked his head. Change? Haku came closer, gesturing at the field as if planting an invisible enemy in their path. Typically one player is leading, drawing the monster's attention. After the monster hits, there is generally a small opening. During that window, a second member of the party calls switch, moves in and attacks while the first player backs off or recovers. Naruto imagined it, one person preparing the attack. Kukut cuts in during the recuperation. Back and forth, pressure not with smooth rhythm to the monster. His expression shifted. That's quite clever. Yes, it is one of the most important player-made techniques. The system does not just give you a switch button that solves the fight. Players coordinate it. Naruto gazed at her. Timing with people is important too. Very much. That made him more quiet. Haku saw but did not ask. She let him think. The grass outside town stirred in the wind. In the distance a boar snorted. A couple players shouted along the main road, one celebrating a kill too loudly. Naruto clenched his hand once. So if I get stronger, it's not just levels. No, said Haku, levels help, gear helps, skill competence helps, but battle also demands if you know about spacing, cooldowns, enemy patterns, and when to trust the system assist. A reckless high-level player can still make blunders. Naruto's gaze snapped to her, and a second-rate player? Can last longer than expected, if he listens. He stared at her. She appeared to be the shy virgin. Too clean. Naruto snorted and looked aside first. Haku's smile warmed, but she let the teasing fade. Again she raised her sword, but this time without the use of a skill, and made a little, normal slash into the air. This is a normal swing. It can hit, it can interrupt small enemies. It can keep a distance. But it is not where most of your damage comes from, so don't feel bad if you don't get it every time. Then she backshifted into the pro N again. The blade was shining. This is a sword skill. It's more powerful, it's faster, it's system assisted. But once your opponent knows what skill you're using, it's predictable, and it's dangerous if used at the wrong time. She released the stance and let the glow die before the skill fired. Naruto watched that too. You can cancel it? Before activation, sometimes. Once it's ready, it's too easy to use. That is why you choose carefully. The words settled in rush as the route logic had earlier. Fighting was another route. Not through the town, by the timing. Normal movement enemy pattern promotion activation hit delay cooldown switch recovery repeat. If he saw it that way, it wasn't just hit harder anymore. It was something he could learn. Naruto peered across the field. The boar out there was low level, nothing important. Nothing like a floor boss. But for the first time, he wasn't thinking about changing it merely to prove he could. He was thinking about where it would go, when it would attack, what opening followed after, and how long Rage Spike would leave him stranded if he utilized it incorrectly. Haku saw the shift in his eyes. She appeared satisfied. Naruto drew his sword. The system placed it in his hand exactly. He rolled his shoulder once, the shoddy armor binding against him. Then he stared at Haku, his expression stern. Show me switch. Haku blinked. Her smile softened then. You're level 3. Nearly 4. That does not change the concern. I'm not asking to fight a boss, Naruto responded, eyes still on the field. Just show me how not to fight stupid. For a time, she simply looked at him. Then she turned toward the road and selected a low-level target marker, sharing it with the party. One boar, she said. No chasing. No extra mobs. No using Rage Spike unless I tell you there is an opening. Naruto nodded once. Actually nodded. Haku pulled her blade again. Together, they stepped off the safe road and into the grass. The grass beyond the road came up to Naruto's shins, brushing against his boots with every step. It bent and divided about him like real grass would, tiny blades dragging on the cheap leather greaves strapped over his beginning gear. The wind flowed across the field in long, smooth waves, carrying the smell of dirt, crushed weeds, and something animal from the boar rooting near a patch of darker soil ahead. Haku stopped before they got too close, to said too, but it took obvious effort. His sword was already in his grasp, the system having answered the thought flawlessly, the blade inclined low at his side. His shoulders were 10. He was excited. More stoked than scared. His gaze was still fixed on the boar, and when he concentrated, he saw the name and level appear above it. Frenzy Boar. LVL. 2 beside him stood Haku, her own weapon drawn, her posture serene and controlled. She acted as if she was watching closely, as if ready herself for disaster. She looked carefully, as if she was about to demonstrate carefully. Don't chase it, she advised. Let it come to us. Naruto nodded. The boar lifted its head. Its small red eyes fixated on them, and the cursor over it shifted. The monster snorted, rubbing one hoof against the earth. Its body fell in a way Naruto immediately understands with the game's knowing game patterns. Charge. His fingers curled around the sword grip. Haku stepped forward first. Not far. Just enough to become the target. The boar rushed, grass breaking around its low body, tusks aimed toward her legs. Haku waited longer than Naruto wanted her to. A bit long. His body was leaning forward before his brain was on board for the ride, but she lifted one hand slightly, a quiet instruction to hold. So he did. The boar got to her. Haku sidestepped at the last second, not in a showy dodge, but a subtle, effective stride that had the boar's charge passing barely off her hip. Her blade came down, a neat, typical cut across its side. A minor damage count appeared and then disappeared. The hog staggered by, turning clumsily. Now, said Haku, change. Naruto stirred. He didn't think about it as much as he probably should have. The word reached his ears, the opening popped up before him, and his body responded. He closed the distance, boots ripping across the grass, sword already rising into the line the tutorial had burned into him, the boar still recovering from its missed charge. It was not a sword skill yet, just a clean attack.
The system softened the movements, but the timing was his. His blade cut into the boar's flank before it fully turned, and another damage number popped above it. The boar's health sank harder than he imagined. Naruto's eyes brightened. He almost followed with another swing. Haku's voice cut in, soothing but forceful. Back. He pushed himself away instead of overcommitting. Barely. The pig whirled toward him, tusks snapping through the area where his leg had been half a second earlier. Naruto felt the air move against his shin and recognized, with a tight tiny spark in his chest, that if he had chased the strike, it would have grabbed him. As he stepped out, Haku stepped in. That was the difference. He didn't understand it at first, he felt it. Was one fellow leaving the monster's notice as the other took the place? Haku's blade met the boar while it was fixated on Naruto, switching its aggression back to her. She wasn't a power hitter. Not at her skill level, not at what she could possibly do if she wanted to terminate the fight fast. She was holding back, tapping lightly, letting the creature survive long enough to learn. Naruto saw. It should have bothered him, it did, sort of. But the larger part of him was preoccupied seeing the pattern. The boar lunge. Haku was not there anymore. Naruto came in. Naruto struck. Naruto retreated. Haku entered. Haku struck. The creature's rhythm broke between them, its rudimentary AI compelled to keep rotating, deciding, resetting. No one stood still and swapped hits. No one swung wildly. Every movement had a place. The third time Haku called switch, Naruto was already moving. Haku saw it. He started before the word fully left her mouth. Not too early, not foolishly racing into the boar's attack, but with a half-second of anticipation that made the exchange smoother than she expected from a player who had only grasped the concept minutes ago. He read the boar's turn, saw its body commit toward Haku, and entered from the side when its strike animation locked forward. His sword slashed across the aperture, clean. The damage number flickered. Haku's eyes narrowed slightly. That was quick. Not ridiculously quick. Not like that. Not in a way that broke the game. His figures were still little. His gun was still a rookie's level. Still the system had command of his movement. But his reply to the opening was more pointed than she expected. Most of the new players quit there. They waited for the order, received it, and moved. Naruto moved, as the gap itself had named him. Haku almost spoke. Then didn't. Probably only because that was the first time she'd seen him in a real discussion. The initial combat quest had been a shambles, packed, full of oath-rayers and terrible angles. This was neater. Easier to view. Mahahas had just been athletic off the game. Maybe the confidence carried over well on the nerve gear. She let the thought slip. The boar snored healthy down in the lower section now. Naruto jumped back and landed, breathing harder but grinning to himself. The stamina bar sank at the edge of his vision, not dangerously, but enough to remind him that excitement still had a cost. Haku switched her grip. This time, utilize Rage Spike after I've drawn its charge. Wait for the miss. Naruto's smile sharpened and took shape, he nodded. Haku went first, 2 rapid steps to the left. The hog followed her, scraping the earth again, and lowering its head. Naruto remained still, every muscle in his body screaming to move, but he forced himself to wait. Haku remarked after the miss. The boar charged them. Haku released it. At the last second she stepped aside again and the boar zipped by, momentum driving it forward. Its body was too slow to turn. Its flank was open toward Naruto. Haku didn't have to say it. Naruto struck a pose. He drew back his sword. The system logged the pre-motion, the angle, the intent, the trigger. Red-orange light crept along the blade, brighter than before since this time he wasn't panicking into it, he did. The skill was released. Naruto raced ahead. Rage Spike threw him through the grass with a crisp thrust, the system aid lining up his body in a line sharper than his own training could have produced. The sword drove firmly into the side of the boar. Impact seized his arm. A bigger damage figure appeared over the creature. The boar was worn out, it exploded into blue-white light polygons. Naruto stood in the fading fragments, his sword outstretched, caught in the post-skill delay for a breath. His body froze for that brief, horrible instant, and now that Haku had explained it he knew precisely how terrible it might be. If there had been something else, he'd have to open it. Then the weight was lifted, he straightened up. A bell rang. Combat objective updated. His bar slipped a tiny experience gain in. Naruto glanced at the bare area of grass where the boar had stood. Then he glanced across at Haku. His grin came all of a sudden.
Not cocky in the slick manner. Not all right. Too bright, too honest, too much like a youngster who just found something that worked and wanted to do it again right now. I've got it. Haku dropped her sword and eyed him closely. You did, he said. No, I mean I really understood it. He turned a little, twirling the sword before he realized it was still out and lowered it before she could correct him. It's not just taking turns striking the creature. It's making it waste attacks. You make it look at you. I hit when it can't move right, then I get out before it fixes itself. Yes, answered Haku. There was a warmth in the word. That's the idea. Naruto turned back to the field, looking for another victim. Haku sensed that too, and stepped in before his feet could make decisions without permission. One, she said. His shoulders drooped a little. One. You wanted flip, not a field war. I wasn't going to begin a field war. She glared at him. He turned away, not a big, Haku's smile returned again, small and helpless. Naruto thought about the system, and his sword returned to his side. The sword sank into its correct position, smooth and faultless as if the world itself had managed the move for him. Then he flexed his hand. He could feel the aftershock of impact in his fingers. Haku had seen that too. He'd won it clean and fair. Nor in an impressive fashion by level standards, nor in a fashion that would have mattered to veteran players, but neatly for someone novice. He had listened. He had waited. He had read the first part. And after he'd figured out the pattern, his body appeared almost to want to fall into it. Again that little thought resurfaced. Fast. She shoved it away. The first experiences in the game were weird. Perhaps she was overreading things. She had spent hours teaching Roots, not watching him fight correctly. Perhaps the contrast made it pop more than it ought to have. It wasn't beyond belief that a level 3 player could land a good switch on a level 2 hog. It was not fair auto explain eth mechanics. Still, as they walked back toward the road, Haku found herself looking at him again. Naruto looked at his experience bar now, his face lit up with the same hunger he felt after the 6-job path. Not merely glad to win. Already transforming the win into questions, into patterns, into what he needed to learn next. He saw her watching him. What? Haku blinked, then grinned gently. Nothing. Naruto squinted. That was one thing. It didn't matter. Rotten liar you are. I am getting better. No, you're not. Haku smiled despite herself, and this time she let the conversation drop without answering. Behind them the grass lay down where the boar had rushed. Ahead, the road returning to town twisted beneath the gentle artificial sun, calm and safe for the moment. One battle Naruto had learnt. Just one. But Haku had a faint, uncomfortable feeling that one was usually plenty to start getting deadly for him. Naruto looked up at him for another second before looking down again into the street. I ain't sayin' I'm gonna run at one right now. Haku gave him a glance that showed she was not quite convinced. Naruto scowled faintly. I am not. I think you think that. But the response was given so calmly that he could find no suitable spot to disagree with it. He scowled more fiercely. They found a calmer bench, in a side path, where fewer players passed through. Haku stopped there to sort her route notes and Naruto halted with her, putting one shoulder on the stone wall next to the bench. He looked out on the plaza, on the players still learning how to be players, the NPCs still moving in their calm loops. Then his gaze returned to Haku. Is this all you do, in these games? She looked up. What do you mean by that? Naruto vaguely nodded towards the town, the paths, the businesses, the NPCs whose names she appeared to know. This. Roots. Errands. Talking to NPCs till they unlock better jobs. Figuring out which dull thing secretly matters. You know a ridiculous lot about all of it. Haku gazed at her hands. Her gloves were simple, nicer than Naruto's, with faint stitching around the borders. She moved even one finger of the glove, but she didn't need to. Not that she was lying. Because the question had touched on something intimate. Yes, she whispered. I suppose. At first Haku didn't say anything, but Naruto was expecting more. The square moved. Water the water lashed in the fountain. Shop signs creaked gently in the artificial wind. A little NPC was around the edge of the stone, laughing as another chased him. A player farther distant yelled about a quest reward so loud it startled pigeons from a rooftop. Haku watched the birds take flight, and then she grinned. Tiny. Nearly private. She said that she liked it quiet. Naruto's eyebrows drew together a little. Haku was watching the square, her voice soft in a manner that made him feel like it would be disrespectful to interrupt even before he understood why. Not always silent in sound. There are people everywhere, especially today. But the pathways themselves are quiet. They make sense. You walk from one place to another. You learn which road curves behind the storehouse, which NPC worries about the courier, which herb grows near the low stone wall, and which guard remembers your name if you bring back a report. The game becomes smaller that way. Naruto looked back at the square, trying to see it through her eyes. He wanted to see it not as a pile of tasks, or monotonous errands disguised as prizes, but as roads, and people, and patterns. A region slowly become familiar. Haku's smile remained dim. Combat is loud. Everyone rushes. Everyone wants to be first, strongest, fastest. I understand why. It is exciting. But I like the peaceful parts. I like walking through the town and knowing where things are. I like helping an NPC and seeing their dialogue change. I like finding a route that lets me move without fighting every second. She looked at him then, almost shy now. It feels peaceful. Naruto hesitated and then answered. He had imagined accusing her of concealing a secret delight, something large and dramatic, perhaps a buried yearning to fight authority, to show herself. He understood that feeling of wanting to go after the huge, final goal. But this one was different. Haku liked the quiet, not because she was afraid or weak, but because the calm meant something to her. Naruto turned to the west route where the sunshine was softening on the gate stones. So you don't want to beat everybody? No, said Haku. I just level fast so I can get to more peaceful places before they get crowded. That answer sounded weird to him. He stared at her once more. This time she said it without embarrassment, and that made it sound true in a way her earlier careful answers had not. No big deal, but level 20. It wasn't even about power, really. It was a question of access. To get ahead of the hubbub so she could find the spaces where the world breathed more slowly. Naruto stroked the back of his neck. That's actually pretty cool. Haku seemed startled. He immediately averted his eyes, as if the stone roadway had pushed the compliment out of him and he hated it. I mean, unusual, he added quickly, but great weird. Her smile grew warmer. All right, he said. Naruto nodded as if a new official statement had just been issued. They stood for a moment, the town moving around them. His eyes went back to the distant highways outside the city, where the green fields spread to areas he had yet to see. I still want to see a boss eventually, he remarked. I know. That was quick, he said. You're so easy to read. Naruto scowled, but it was a cold frown. Haku folded her hands again, as serene as ever. And you're not saying you can't. Just not yet. Bosses need prep. Levels, gear, info, parties that listen to each other. People get hurt rushing into exciting things they don't understand first. It sobered him more than he thought it would. Naruto looked at the indication of his level. Not quite high enough. Still learning. Wearing beginning gear that looked like someone with a specific vendetta against style had made it. But now the distance did not seem a road, not AAA wall, a very long one. Haku delivered him another route message, soft and clear in his menu. Naruto took it. The small chime rang out. He gazed again to the west gate, then at the peaceful streets Haku had shown him. Okay, he said. More peaceful means. Haku's eyes sparkled a little. Before she could appreciate that too much, Naruto pointed at her. But if something comes at us, I'm fighting it. That's permitted. And if there's crazy bread on the path, we're stopping. That is not efficient. It added a comfort boost. Haku smiled gently, amusement. Naruto turned to face the road. He shrugged his shoulders, letting the fake breeze tug at his hair. He still dreamed of being the boss someday, desired the challenge, and was ready to see what was at the end of the floor. For now he followed Haku back into the quieter streets, learning the form of the globe one serene lane at a time. Naruto stared at the location where the boar had disappeared. The grass was already matted. That was bizarre too. The struggle had been real enough to make his heart kick, real enough to rattle the impact up his arm, real enough that the boar's rush made his body want to move before he thought about it. Then when its health was down to zero, it broke apart into light and left the field almost calm. No one. No hassle. Just grass, breeze, a little reward bell, and a number inching up. Naruto glanced at his express bar. Then he accessed his status screen. Level Naruto. 3. He peered more intensely. The figure wouldn't budge. His eyes followed the screen, examining numbers that he still didn't grasp. Power. Flexible. Vigor. Equipment values, skill levels. Sort of a weapon. He is near to the next level but not there. His experience bar is close enough to be offensive. She had already started back toward the road,
but she saw he wasn't beside her yet. She glanced round. Naruto stood in the field, his menu open, his sword already sheathed at his hip, brows furrowed in concentration. What's wrong? Naruto didn't even look up. How does leveling work? Haku blinked once and took a few steps backwards. Experience is gained through quests, combat, exploration and certain system milestones. No, I get that part. Naruto jabbed a finger at his status window as if he were accusing it. I mean, what does it do? Haku's face softened in understanding. She stood next him, near enough to view his menu without crowding him. A gentle breeze stirred in her black hair, raising some strands to her cheek. It gives you more base stats. Naruto gazed at her. He looked down at himself, and then back to her. I don't feel any different, usually not after one level. That's dumb. It's balance. It's a stupid balance. Haku's mouth touched with a ghost of a smile, but her voice was patient. The increases are small. Level gives you better base numbers, but the game does not suddenly make you feel like a different person. You may notice it over time. Slightly healthier health. Slightly more stamina. Slightly better damage. Better survivability. The real difference comes when levels combine with gear, weapon skill proficiency, and better sword skills. Naruto peered at his stat display as if it could disappoint him. So I leveled, but I don't really do anything? You do a lot of things. I mean with the points. He pushed one finger through the air, moving the menu down. Where's the thing where I put points into strength or speed or whatever? There aren't any free stat points like that. Naruto glanced over at her directly. His visage was a mask of betrayal. Haku looked at him straight. Naruto looked down the menu and then up at her. What do you mean? There are no points. I mean leveling up gives you automatic stat increases. You customize your character more through skills, equipment, weapon choice, and how you fight. Naruto gawked. The ground surrounding them was still smooth and glowing, quite inappropriate for the emotional wreckage the system had just served him. So it just decides like that? It's in the evolution of the system. That's an option. You still have alternatives. Where? He asked. Haku raised a hand and pointed to the bottom of his status screen. Skills. Your limited skill slots matter. Weapon proficiency matters. Equipment matters. If you want to hit harder, you can use a better weapon, upgrade your weapon skill, upgrade equipment, choose combat support skills, and fight enemies that give better experience. If you want to move better, you can train movement, wear lighter gear, improve relevant skills, and learn timing. Naruto listened, but maintained a doubtful expression. Haku continued, feeling the need to establish the concept in something less vague. Consider levels as your foundation. They add strength to the body in the background, but they are not your entire character. A level 10 player with terrible equipment and bad habits can still struggle. A lower level player with good gear, solid skills, and good timing can perform better than expected. Naruto glanced down at his poor armor. The starting leather gave a soft creak as he moved. So this trash matters. Yes. He tapped the chest plate with 2 fingers. Rude, but yeah, I figured. And your weapon skill matters. Haku pointed to the sword at his hip. The more you use the one-handed sword correctly, the higher your proficiency will be. Higher proficiency means you can unlock more sword skills and be better at using that weapon type. Naruto narrowed his gaze. That part got him. So I keep utilizing it, and I get better moves. Yes. And the level pushes the numbers higher. Yep. And gear makes those numbers even more meaningful. Generally. And missions are how I refrain from wasting my time fighting over the same 3 pigs with every other moron in town. Haku's smile warmed. Yes. Naruto stared at the menu again, his fury turning to consideration this time. The system would not give him a big satisfying pile of points to toss into strength until he was unfair. It was annoying. Really obnoxious. But it also meant there were other possibilities. Abilities equipment. Unblock route. More mobs. Timing is better. Enhanced sword skill. Just a series of little quiet unpleasant things that added up. Like the paths for the mission. Just like Haku. Naruto crossed his arms, glaring at his own level as if he could threaten it into going up. So leveling up is boring. They're counted. Important is boring. That's the way. He looked to her. You didn't invent that one. I agree with you. That doesn't sound right. Haku's smile turned a little amused, but she allowed the silence to breathe. Naruto closed the status menu and opened the skill menu again. Haku stared without speaking. His fingers moved more confidently now, less like he was swiping at luminous air,
more like he was starting to understand how thinking and motion worked together inside the interface. The list of skills rolled open. Some were locked. Some were present. Some were extensive enough descriptions to make Naruto's face clench at the sight. He made himself read it, anyway. Haku saw that, too. One-handed sword proficiency was near the top, progressed a little but not empty. The small bar had shifted after the tutorial and the slimes in the boar. Not a lot, but enough to show it was alive. Naruto bent forward. That went up. Yes. His eyes were on it. Not from leveling. No useful. His mouth stretched into a slow grin. That was another thing. That sounded better. Levels were something the game granted for doing enough labor. Skill competence that demonstrated his activities cutting a groove into the system. It swung wide open prand. It moved. Use the weapon. It moved, smarter. Fig. Which he enjoyed. Haku sensed the shift and tilted her head a little. You like that? Yeah. Why? Naruto gazed at the little proficiency bar, then looked over towards the field that the boar had smashed. Because that indicates I'm truly doing it. Haku's face relaxed. At first Naruto didn't notice it. He was too caught up in the menu, in the bar's small movement, in the thought that the game was keeping track of more than just kills and Yurace. What it was viewing. What he used to. What he did. Until things got better. He repeated that. That he could work with. He could use it, okay. Haku stared at the road, then back at him. That's why I said don't just hurry combat tasks. If you only chase experience, you'll level up but miss out on skill improvement, gear access, NPC routes, and supplies. If you just train skills, you'll get better with your weapon but stay underleveled. The game rewards balance. Naruto carefully closed the skill window. Balance, he repeated, as if the word had a dubious flavor. Yes. I hate that the smart answer is so often dull. It is peaceful. To you. Haku smiled again, softly and sincerely. Me. Naruto shook his head, but without any bite. He turned back to the town, where the gate waited at the end of the road, and beyond it, the job board, the pharmacy, the hidden pathways, the NPCs with ridiculously essential dialogue, the next parts of the ascent. His level hadn't changed from the boar, not yet. But something had. The game was starting to make sense in layers. Experience made the number embodies performance better at SC things. Gear modified what risks were worth taking. NPC interactions opened safer, smarter roadways. Combat rewarded timing, not simply aggression. And all of it mattered. Naruto moved his shoulders, his armor sliding against him, and glanced at Haku with that menacing little grin again. So basically, he explained, if I want to catch you, I have to level, train skills, get better gear, learn routes, talk to fake people, read quest descriptions, and not fight every monster I see. Haku nodded. Yes, he stared at her. That's a lot. It is. Going to do it still, I assumed. Naruto pointed at her bali, as that answer upset him because it was right, then turned toward the road. Haku fell into step beside him, serene as ever. Naruto's eyes flickered once more to the edge of his vision where his experience bar waited, near to level 4 but not there yet. Then to the sword at his hip, where the proficiency bar had moved by his own hand. The level could wait. For once, he had something better than impatience. He had a system to beat. The route back to town was quiet until it wasn't. Naruto had just started walking faster, half from impatience and half because his experience bar was sitting close enough to level 4 to irritate him. Haku strode beside him at her customary level pace, hands relaxed near her sides, eyes occasionally flickering toward the field to monitor monster routes out of habit. The wind dragged through the thick grass, and the town of beginnings lay ahead of them behind its stone gate, warm and safe looking beneath the false afternoon sky. Then the world made a sound. Not a bell, not a chime. Something deeper. A low, resonant pulse drifted through the air, heavy enough that Naruto felt it in his chest before he recognized he was hearing it. The grass stopped moving. The distant NPC talk from the gate stopped off mid-loop. Even the pig strolling near the slope halted with one hoof elevated, its little name marker lingering above it like the game had suddenly forgotten to end the moment. Naruto stopped. Haku stopped too. Her expression altered first. That was what made him tense. What is that? Before Haku could answer, blue light burst open beneath their feet. Naruto stared down sharply. A bright circle had formed under him, rings of symbols swirling over the ground. The same light appeared beneath Haku. Beyond her, farther out in the field, other players shouted as circles emerged under them too, capturing everyone at once. Naruto's hand snapped toward his sword. The system did not stop him, but it didn't matter. The light ascended. It rose around his legs, his waist, his chest, engulfing the field in bits. His gut lurched the way it had when the full dive first pulled him in, although this time he was already within, the world and the world were moving him nonetheless. Haku. The glow covered his view. For half a breath, there was nothing but blue. Then his boots hit stone. Noise slammed into him. Naruto staggered one step, sword half drawn, and found himself back in the center plaza of the town of beginnings. Not close to the west gate, not en route, main square. He was not alone. Players were popping up all around. Hundreds of them. Thousands, maybe. Blue teleport light pulsed in waves throughout the square, depositing individuals onto the stone, onto fountain edges, between store stalls, in the middle of discussions that cut off into uncertainty. Some players went down on their knees on the quick change. Some fell on top of each other. Some had weapons out like Naruto, blades appearing in their hands on impulse and then attacking their fellow gamers instead of the monsters surrounding them. The square, which had been so huge before, now seemed too little. Suddenly the voices rose. What's happened? You moved too? Is this, like, a thing? I was outside the west gate? My party was out in the field. Where's Ken? Can we teleport back? Why are all of you here? Naruto spun around and searched for Haku. For one terrible second he couldn't see her. Players only. Armor. Opening menus. Flickering name tags above heads. Cheap beginner gear and slightly more advanced gear from people who'd already been on. Behind him the fountain splashed as if nothing was amiss, but the sound was almost lost in the rising panic. And then he spotted her. Haku was a few steps off, pushed back a little by the mob, but still on his feet. Her hand was near her sword, but not on it, and her eyes were darting over the plaza. At first she seemed peaceful. Haku always knew how to make calm happen on her face, but Naruto could sense the difference now. Her shoulders were taut. The lovely curve of her mouth was gone. Her eyes flicked from player to player, then up, then to the system windows opening in vain all around them. Naruto shoved past two players and reached her. One guy swore at him. Naruto pretended not to hear him. What the fuck was that? Haku gazed at him, and then around the square again. Teleportation. Forced. I figured that part out. His voice was rougher than he intended. The teleport had left his skin tingling and he despised being moved against his will. He pondered, and the sword was missing, partially because Haku hadn't taken her out, and partly because it seemed silly to be wielding a weapon in this crowd all of a sudden. Haku opened her menu. Her fingers moved swiftly. Map. Party. System. Event log. She checked something, grimaced mildly, then closed one window and opened another. Naruto observed her face instead of the menus. She didn't know. That was worse than any answer. Around them, more players appeared. The blue light kept pulsing. Every time another wave arrived, the chanting increased louder. The courtyard filled with bodies, name tags, queries, dread disguised as displeasure, enthusiasm, trying too hard, excitement, and excitement. A boy close laughed too loudly and spread his arms. Probably a launch event, relax. Then why didn't it say anything? Someone else shot back. Another player was opening and closing and opening and closing. The logout button is acting funny. Naruto turned his head to him. Haku heard it as well. Her gaze focused for a moment. Then she looked at Naruto and her face softened the anxiety on her face before it could fully manifest. Sometimes online make games do announcements, she stated. Naruto blinked at her. Her voice was kind, but a bit too careful now. Launch events, said her. Free stuff, additional experience, thank you gifts for the people that played on day one. Sometimes the devs will teleport everyone to a central place where they may make an announcement for the whole server. Naruto peered around the bustling square. That sounded reasonable. Sort of. The crowd certainly wanted it to make sense. Once the idea spread, he could hear people clutching onto it in little pieces. Free present maybe. Beta reward? Opening ceremony? Maybe they're giving everyone a bonus call? Dude, imagine rare cosmetics day one. Naruto should have relaxed. He didn't, because Haku still wasn't relaxed. Not really. Her hands were folded in front of her again, but this time, her posture was controlled rather than peaceful. She pressed her fingers lightly into the back of one glove as her eyes moved upward. Naruto followed her gaze and noticed that the sky above them looked unusual.
It wasn't immediately obvious, especially with all the noise and crowds around, but the blue sky had darkened at the azes, like evening had arrived too quickly. The clouds had stopped moving, and the sunlight hitting the rooftops appeared flatter, less warm, less natural. The world seemed to hold its breath. Naruto felt a tightening in his stomach. He went closer to Haku, dropping his voice without thinking. Do they generally freeze everything first? Haku did not answer immediately. That was adequate answer. Naruto narrowed his gaze. Haku. Then she stared at him. Her voice still had sweetness, but it was muted now. No, not very often. Another pulse ran through the plaza from above and suddenly all menus disappeared. Naruto's status window flashed out and Haku's open system panel disappeared before she could touch it. Around them players shouted as their menus suddenly closed, hundreds of glowing windows closing in unison. The plaza darkened as a thick unnatural red light began to collect in the sky, neither sunlight nor sunset, but a dye-like substance spreading across the false blue. The noise changed, losing its excitement. Naruto instinctively moved half in front of Haku, eyes up and body tense. Haku noticed his movement and looked at him, startled briefly, but he was too focused on the sky. Higher above, system in red appeared one after another, forming a massive ring in the sky. Warning, warning. Caution. The word echoed over and over again, until the whole ceiling was filled with it. Naruto felt the crowd go quiet in waves. Just a few moments ago everyone was shouting over each other, but now the silence spread faster than the teleportation light. Naruto swallowed once, his hand reaching for his sword again even though there was nothing to strike at. Haku's voice reached him as a faint whisper nearby. That's not a gift announcement. Naruto didn't look away from the sky. The red light grew brighter. The world above them began to tear apart. The sky turned into a screen. That's the first thing Naruto plainly understands. Not the teleport. Not the crowd. Not the missing menus. Not the red warning panels flowing across the false blue above them. His attention settled on that one simple item, since all the rest was too big to hold all at once. The sky was a screen. Huge red blocks of system text burned above, stacked upon one another until the town of beginnings looked like it had been caught under a ceiling of blood-colored glass. Every player in the plaza looked up. Some still had their hands raised from trying to open menus. Some had weapons out. Some stood frozen with expressions caught between annoyance and nervous laughter, waiting for the moment where all of this turned into a joke, a launch event, a reward, anything normal enough to let them breathe again. Naruto stood on the brink of the fountain, a sword in his hand. He didn't recall drawing it. That basic longsword looked stupid against that crimson sky. Basic steel. Starter weapon. For boars and slimes and training dummies, not for whatever had reached through the system and grabbed every player in the game by the throat and hauled them back to town. Next to him, Haku had gone extremely still. That worried him more than the mob. Haku was silent by nature, but this was something else. This was not the silence of someone who liked serene ways and knew which NPCs opened hidden chains. This was the silence of someone whose mind had sprinted ahead, examined every system she understood, and discovered no safe road. Naruto looked at her. Her hands were clasped, her fingers pressed so tightly together they creased her gloves. Her long dark hair framed a face that was pale and small under the red light. The name above her head, Ice_Girl, LV. 20, suddenly seemed useless. Level 20 meant nothing in a town full of people staring at the sky like kids under a collapsing roof. Then the red panels ripped apart, something dropped. A massive robed figure lowered itself from the wound in the sky, crimson cloth hanging in heavy folds, sleeves wide and empty, hood dark. No face waited inside it. No eyes. No mouth. Nothing human for anger to aim at. Just a vast, faceless presence suspended above the plaza, large enough that its shadow rolled over the fountain, the rooftops, the packed bodies of thousands of trapped players. It hadn't said anything before the scream started. Naruto tightened his hold on his blade until his knuckles hurt. Haku made a little noise near him, not much, almost nothing. But Naruto heard. The voice of the figure filled the world. Players. The word ran through stone and skin. It came from all directions at once, pressed into Naruto's chest, vibrated in his teeth, turned the whole plaza into a mouth for one man's voice. My name is Akihiko Kayaba. I am the god who made Sword Art Online, and right now, I am the one and only who controls this universe. The audience shifted like an animal waking into dread. Kayaba Akihiko. Naruto knew that name. Minato had said it at the kitchen table,
eyes bright with the kind of excitement Naruto had made fun of him for. Nagato had helped get the system. Kushina had worn a cardboard head and called herself Nerd Robot Minato. Naruto had laughed. He had logged in because his dad wanted the game too badly and because spite was easier than admitting curiosity. The creator of the game towered over Tam like some faceless god. Haku's hand twitched, not towards her weapon, but her menu. Her fingers flew through the air with practiced precision, a fluid gesture Naruto had seen a million times. Nothing happened, so she tried again, this time with a sharper flick of her wrist. Still nothing. Her breathing changed, subtly, and Naruto noticed. She knew, long before Kayaba said it. Haku could feel it. Naruto's stomach dropped as Kayaba spoke, his voice steady and almost gentle, but completely emotionless. You have probably noticed by now that the log-out option is not on the main menu. A rush of noise swept through the plaza. Players scrambled with their menus. Hands flailed in the air. People called for system help, administrators, or friends who HBY'd their side them before the teleport scattered everyone. A man near Naruto opened his mouth, laughing briefly, sharp and strained, before breaking into sobs. Someone shoved past, shoulder knocking Naruto's back, but he hardly reacted. He was focused on Haku. Her eyes gazed upward, wide, dark, and filled with fear. This is not a defect, Kayaba stated. Naruto looked up again. His whole body was warming up. It's a feature of Sword Art Online. For a moment, Naruto didn't even know what the sentence meant. Not because the words were difficult, but because they were too big to hold. A feature. The way home that was missing was a feature. This time the crowd did break harder. Screams tore through the square. Players yelled that he was lying, that it was illegal, that their parents would call the police, that someone outside would shut it down. The denial came fast, desperate, ugly. It spilled from everyone because the alternative was too big. Naruto's breathing was ragged. His blade shook, not from fear but with a growing wrath looking for a release. Kayaba's voice was calm. There is no way to log out of Blade Art Online freely as a player. Besides, no outside force can safely turn off or remove nerve gear. Haku almost lost her footing, her knees collapsing, but Naruto held her just in time. Instantious Tively moved closer, shoulder pressing against someone to keep her from being jostled. His hand hovered near her arm but didn't touch, as if a part of him still remembered how much he had flinched earlier when she grabbed his hand, or how odd it felt to have someone else's presence here. That feeling was pointless now. Everything was pointless. The fountain splashed on. The faint smell of bread in the town remained. A few hours ago that smell had amazed him. Now it made him want to break something. Kayaba explained the nerve gear. They were talking about the transmitters and microwaves, how the machine could fry a player's brain if its safeties were turned off. Someone in the crowd shouted in disbelief, and another voice, strained but knowledgeable, talked about NALs, the technology enabled them how the internal battery made power removal ineffective. Naruto caught very little of the technical details, but he understood enough. The helmet on his real head wasn't just a protective covering, it was a weapon. Minato might try to take it off, and that thought hit Naruto so hard, his vision flashed white at the edges for a second. Of course his father would try to save him. Calm, brilliant, careful Minato would hear the word, trapped, and immediately try to find a way to help. Kushina would be there too, furious and terrified, hands trembling as she fought not to rip Naruto's helmet off with her bare hands. Maybe Nagato knew more than anyone else, maybe he would call or warn them, maybe it would be too late. Naruto's jaw clenched until pain flared near his ear. Kayaba kept talking, telling them he had warned the outside world. People had ignored the warning and 213 players were already dead. The plaza fell silent, as still as a body after impact. 213. Naruto didn't know them. That didn't matter. He still saw faces. Players laughing in the plaza earlier, someone buying bread, someone rushing through the tutorial, someone changing their appearance to be taller, prettier, stronger, or stranger. Others logged in out of curiosity, for fun, because their dad gave them something, or a cousin helped them get it, or just because they could leave when dinner was ready. 213 people. Gone. Before the game really got going. Haku's hand reached for his sleeve, not his hand this time, just the edge of his starter armor. Fingers clutching the cheap leather like it was the only solid thing in the entire square. Naruto looked down, her hand trembled. Haku looked up, mouth opened, face stripped of every lovely touch of calm he'd seen in her. No sweet smile. No quiet patience. No patient explanation of roots and NPC connections. Just dread, raw and human. sitting within an avatar that seemed too real under the blood-red sky. Naruto's anger took form. It did not disappear, but became focused. Kayaba announced that the revival system no longer in effect was gone. Dying in the game meant losing the avatar forever. At the same time, the nerve gear would destroy the player's brain in reality. Die here. Die for real. These words went around in silence. Naruto looked at the sword he was holding. He'd fought one boar. One. He'd fell, because he learned to switch to time raw. After all, because a level 2 monster shattered into light instead of biting him. He'd asked about us if like they were a challenge to be faced waiting someday. Something exciting. Something at the end of the road. There were teeth on every monster outside the gate now. Every mistake had weight, every wrong move could mean a funeral in 2 worlds. Haku's grip on his sleeve tightened as Kayaba lifted up an enormous sleeve, revealing an image of Aincrad in the sky, the floating castle with floors piled impossibly high. There's just one way out, Kayaba stated. You have to beat the game. Defeat the boss of each floor and climb to the pinnacle of Aincrad. Clear all 100 floors. That way, all the players that survive will be let go. He heard Haku's breath catch, a small sound that let him know she was trying very hard not to make any sound at all. He turned to her fully. The announcement was lost behind him for a moment. The crowd's noise grew louder. The red sky turned to daylight. Only Haku was there beside him, level 20 and scared, clutching his sleeve as if she'd lose him if she let go. She said she liked the quiet parts, the quiet paths, the NPCs who remembered your name, the roads where the world felt smaller, calmer. Kayaba had taken that quiet and made it into a cage. Naruto's chest itched with pain. His hand gripped hers, and Haku's eyes snapped to him in surprise. He could feel her warmth, real and trembling. This time, he didn't flinch. His voice was low, gravelly so it hardly sounded like him. Don't let go. Haku looked at him. Players around them yelled again as Kayaba's words echoed through the plaza. Some fainted, some shouted at the sky. A few threw weapons at the towering figure, only for them to harmlessly vanish before hitting him. Many repeatedly opened menus, desperately hunting for the log out button in hopes that grief could be undone. Naruto kept his eyes on Haku until she gave the faintest nod. Then he looked back up at the sky. Kayaba's robe billowed above them, faceless and beyond reach. Naruto's fear still lingers. He wasn't stupid enough not to be afraid, he felt it with every breath. His real body was somewhere impossibly far away, helpless under a machine his family couldn't touch. Every floor above was like a mountain pressing down on him. But now, fear had to share space with other emotions, anger, promise, and a painful, burning certainty that someone had hurt people on purpose and justified it as rules. Naruto took a single step forward. Haku's hand stayed in his. His sword hung useless in his other hand against the vast sky, but he lifted his head anyway. What the hell, somebody nearby said. They were not heard by Naruto. His world was down to the faceless thing in the sky and the impossible truth crushing all of the people in the plaza. 213 dead. No log out. No revival. 100 floors. A helmet around his real head his parents couldn't reach. His mother outside this world, probably screaming. His father outside this world, probably trying to stay calm because if he didn't everything would fall apart. Kayaba kept talking. That just made it worse. The man did not stop. Did not see the threat. Did not respond to being cursed by some nobody in starter gear standing in a crowd of thousands of trapped players. His voice rolled on across the town, firm and final. Naruto tightened his mouth so hard his teeth ached. I'm going to kill you, I said. Again he cried, louder this time, and he took a step forward, as if distance counted for anything. You hear me? I don't care how many floors, how many bosses, how much of this ridiculous world you hide behind, I'm going to find you. Haku looked at him, pale and shaken, but she held on. It was the only thing keeping him from pushing further into the crowd, as if rage itself could reach the sky. Kayaba's robes fluttered. Still no answer. Still nothing. Naruto's rage exploded in that silence, with nowhere to go. It turned inward for a moment, flickering across his face with pain. Not weakness or fear, but the helplessness of not being able to punch the one causing everyone harm. His sword hand trembled. Then Haku softly spoke his name. Naruto. It was almost inaudible, amid the chaos. But he listened. His eyes flicked down to her, and the sight of her stopped him more effectively than anything Kayaba could have said. Haku's face was drained, her mouth pressed tight, her dark eyes too wide as she fought to keep herself standing. She was level 20. She knew roots. She knew hidden chains and quiet roads and how to turn one job into 6. And she looked scared to death. Naruto's anger did not go away. It shifted course. He walked back to her, shoulder angled between Haku and the worst of the crowd, sword lowered at his side. He still glared up at them, still looked like he'd tear Kayaba apart if the man came low enough to reach, but his hand shifted around Haku's, holding tighter now. And anchoring as much as himself. Above them, Kayaba's last words poured out onto the square. I hope you win the game. I left an item in your inventories for all players. Check it now, please. 1,000 menus opened up at once, not because people wanted to follow him. Because panic made hands move before pride did. That idea, so acute it almost ached, brought Naruto's own inventory window up. There, in the first available spot, as if it had always been there, was a small, square icon. Mirror. Hand he looked at it. Haku opened hers beside him. Her face stiffened at what she saw. Players started pulling the thing out all over the plaza. Mirrors appeared in hands all over. Small and simple. Polished glass with bare metal framing it. Some looked at them like they might be weapons. Others dropped them. A few held them up with ink fingers. No one knew what refusing would even mean at this point. Naruto thought, and his mirror appeared in his palm. It was cool and light. He looked down, and for a moment the face reflected was the one he had made. Mostly himself, blonde hair, blue eyes, the same features, the same stubborn expression. 3 inches taller. Deathadal, silly lie. The mirror flashed suddenly, and a burst of white light erupted across the plaza. Naruto raised one arm instinctively, still holding Haku's hand in the other. The light consumed everything, scorching through the crimson sky, the fountain, the throng, the robes above them. It didn't hurt, but it rubbed against his skin like the full dive transition all over again. Then it was gone. The next sound was not one sound, but the awareness of thousands of people that their bodies had changed. Naruto blinked rapidly. His first impression was his height. The world seemed to be falling down. Actually, he was the one falling down. The extra inches all at once disappeared from him. His balance corrected immediately, because the system took care of it, but the sudden wrongness made his stomach lurch. The armor fit itself to his new frame, shrinking and adjusting smoothly, erasing the taller version of himself he had made in character creation. He looked at his hands. Same hands, real hands, the proportions of his real body, his real height. The tiny scar beside his thumb, the curve of his fingers, the precise body he'd left on the couch. He looked up immediately. The plaza had gone into chaos all around him again. The avatars were becoming real looks. Tall heroic men turned into shorter, softer-faced boys. Beautiful women flickered into awkward teenage boys, faces horrified. Broad warriors became thin players with glasses. Some female avatars became male. Some male avatars became female. Some players changed barely at all, which somehow made them look more exposed, not less. Hair colors dulled. Faces shifted. Body types corrected. Costumes remained, but the people in them became painfully, brutally human. The game had stripped away everyone's masks. Naruto stared at Haku and faltered. Haku stayed close, but the difference was there. Naruto only saw flashes, because Haku was still holding his hand. He turned, and a flash of rage flickered. Haku had changed, but not in a way Naruto knew. The cute girl avatar from before was gone, but what stood there now didn't help the situation any. Haku was taller than him now, actually taller, and that immediately bothered Naruto somewhere petty and irrational, with long black hair falling around a face that looked even prettier than before. Not flashy. Not fake. Just delicate and sharp and unfairly calm looking even with his eyes wide with terror. Naruto stared. His intellect struggled to place the difference. It performed a horrible job. He blinked, eyes scanning up and down once. You grew. Haku looked back at him, white and trembling. Naruto's face actually screwed up in offense. And beautiful. How did you get so pretty? That's unjust. I lost my height. Haku's lips twitched a little, but no sound came out. Naruto looked like he may continue, like he might accuse Haku of cheating the mirror in some manner, but suddenly Kayaba's voice rolled across the square again, and all the bewilderment on Naruto's face burned away. The faceless man was still above them, still speaking, still calm, as if he had 10,000 lives in his world. Naruto's eyes snapped up. The mirror in his hand cracked under his grip and shattered into shards of light. Kayaba's robe moved as he continued, showing the gift the true appearances, and talking about his world like it was the end of a great tutorial, not a massacre in eloquent words. Naruto stopped listening. His other fist squeezed, squeezing Haku's hand, his nails digging into his palm. Then he stepped forward. Kayaba. His voice cracked, it was harsh enough to scrape his throat. It did not quiet the plaza. It didn't stop the tears. It didn't turn every player. But the folk around startled, because Naruto's cry had cut sharper than panic. It cut the fear around him like a hurled stone through glass. Naruto's piercing blue eyes were blazing with rage as he looked up at the faceless creator. I'm going to kill ya. The words ripped out of him. Haku squeezed his hand, but this time Naruto scarcely noticed. I don't care how many floors you hide behind, Naruto said, taking another step as if he could climb the air if he hated hard enough. I don't care how many bosses you have, how many rules, how much of this world you control. You killed people. You trapped us. You put my family out there with my body and told them they can't even touch me. His voice was breaking, but he didn't stop. Don't you dare do that and walk away. Do you hear me? I'm going to find you. Panic shook the plaza around him. Some players were staring. Some were terrified of him. Some seemed like they had enough breath left to scream the same thing. Kayaba's faceless hood came off slowly. It was the first time that he had felt as if the monster in the sky was looking at him. Not quite, not enough, personally, but that's enough. The red cloak floated still over the square, vast and impossible. Kayaba's voice came down softer than before, not quieter exactly, but focused in a way that made the air around Naruto feel colder. I hope so. Naruto froze. Haku beside him held his breath. Kayaba's hood was still inclined toward them, a blackness where a face should have been. Kayaba, calm as ever, added, I truly hope you do, for the sake of all the players here. Then the figure started to dissolve. Naruto instinctively lunged forward. Don't run away from me, but there was nothing to hold on to. The robe ripped into a patchwork of crimson light, its huge sleeves turning into streams of blazing bits. The warning panels died off one by one. The awful red left the sky, and was succeeded by the same flawless blue that had deceived him before. Kayaba's form weakened and scattered, then disappeared. Naruto stood there, panting, peering into nothingness. His whole body shivered. Fear was no longer his only feeling. There was wrath, helplessness, and the feeling that his promise was too huge for him, for his sword, for his shoddy armor, for his shaking hands. That simple gesture was enough to finally snap him out of his daze, still gripping Haku's hand. Naruto gazed at him, again. Haku was still taller, still achingly lovely in a way that Naruto didn't know what to do with. Still looking white. Still scared. His fingers trembled in Naruto's, and for one passing, dumb second Naruto's mind went back to his earlier fears. How in the hell did he get prettier? Then came a scream from behind them and the plaza was in total turmoil. Players sprinted all over the place. Some dropped on their knees. Some called out names. Some menus scratched. Some gazed at their transformed bodies as if twice in one day they had lost themselves. A boy by the fountain cried so hard he could hardly breathe. Another player slashed at a wall until his weapon bounced uselessly on the safe zone protection. Haku's confusion as to Naruto fell away in the face of what mattered. Haku rocked it. Naruto grabbed him by the shoulders. Search. Haku looked him in the eye. They were overly big, lost too much. Naruto's hand tightened, not harshly, but firmly enough to keep him there. We're not dying here. Haku's lips twitched once. Naruto. I mean it. His voice was still scratchy from shouting but quieter now. Close. You know this place. You know routes. You know how to level without wasting time. You know how to obtain supplies, safe roads, all that boring piece, full things you like. Haku blinked, stunned still. Naruto's jaw gritted. That counts now. You hear me? That counts. Haku glanced past him at the throng, at the shattered players, and the blue sky where Kayaba had disappeared. 100 floors, muttered Haku. I heard him. I never battled a boss. I didn't either. I don't feel any better for that. Naruto nearly laughed, but it came out wrong, harsh and breathless. Yeah. That's fair. His hands remained on Haku's shoulders. The flimsy armor was creaking in his fingertips. The contact felt real, still. Too close. Yet he did not withdraw. He peered up once more at the empty sky, and Kayaba's words resonated in his skull. I hope so. Naruto's expression turned grim. Then we prepare, he said. Haku gazed at him. Naruto's blue eyes were still staring up at the sky above, but his hold kept Haku solid. We level up. We understand the roots. We gain gear. We find individuals who can fight and people who know how to think. We clear his silly floors. His voice lowered, and when I reach him, he never finished because he didn't have to. Naruto couldn't look away from Haku's eyes, still wide with terror and amazement, and the man was impossibly gorgeous and tall, a pairing that Naruto's thoughts would take longer to sort out. Haku's hand trembled as it slowly reached out and covered Naruto's. It wasn't fine, it wasn't okay, but it was there. Naruto glanced down at him, and they both stayed still for a time. Then Naruto gave a curt nod, indicating that this was the only answer he could provide. Good, he said. Now don't let go. Haku's fingers curled tighter. I will not.